Chapter 2296. Time passed quickly. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed. Yun Yarrow and the glazed fiery dragon joined hands and slaughtered more than 20,000 demon warriors in the city. The devil army was utterly defeated. Only about 5,000 of them were left, and they fled in all directions. Yun Yarrow didn't chase after them. She brought the glazed fiery dragon back to Ji Tianxing's side. At this time, Ji Tianxing grabbed the purple-robed man with his left hand. His right hand was casting a spell, shooting out beams of sacred white light. Swish, swish, swish. Each beam of white light was only 1 foot long. They were like silver needles, piercing into the purple-robed man's glabella, forehead, and neck. In the end, more than 60 beams of white light gathered in his mind. They arranged themselves in a special order and moved around slowly. The purple-robed man's body twitched. His face was contorted in pain. Foul blood kept spurting out from his nose and mouth as if he was about to die. Yun Yarrow frowned. She was a little worried, but she didn't say anything. She didn't want to disturb Ji Tianxing's spellcasting. 100 breaths of time passed. The purple-robed man's twitching became more and more severe. His head was crooked, his eyes were slanted, and his face was twitching. More foul blood flowed out from his mouth. Suddenly, Ji Tianxing waved his right hand and shot out a spell seal as fast as lightning. Swish! The 60 beams of sacred white light condensed into an egg-sized light ball and flew out from the purple-robed man's head. A mass of dark red mist was wrapped in the dense white light ball. It was still twisting and struggling fiercely. At the same time, the purple-robed man opened his mouth and spat out a jet of black blood. He closed his eyes and fainted. Yun Yarrow asked with concern, "Tianxing, how's the situation? This man. Is he saved?" "Yes," Ji Tianxing nodded. He took the white light ball and presented it to Yun Yarrow. "I tried many methods, but I couldn't get rid of the strange race's soul-controlling technique. So, I tried to use the power of the heaven-mending pearl. Sure enough, it could get rid of this evil power. It's just that the method was a bit harsh. It stimulated this man's soul too much. That's why he fainted. But he should be fine. He will wake up in a while." After listening to Ji Tianxing's explanation, Yun Yarrow finally understood the whole story and was completely relieved. Then, Ji Tianxing repeated the same trick and removed the power of the soul-controlling technique for the other human experts. Those human experts in armor were all generals and dignitaries of Tai City. By controlling the city owner and those nobles, the non-humankind guards would be able to control the entire Tai City. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. Ji Tianxing removed the mysterious energy from the bodies of the generals and nobles. At this time, City Lord Tai Yi coughed twice and gradually woke up. Blood was dripping from the corner of his mouth. He looked around blankly and finally, his gaze fell on Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow. He got up in a daze, rubbed his aching forehead, and couldn't help but mutter, "Where is this place? What about the demon army? Have you beaten them back? Quickly help me up. I can't rest. I must fight to the end." As he spoke, City Lord Tai Yi stood up shakily and reached out to feel for the sword at his waist. Ji Tianxing said in a dignified tone, "City Lord Tai Yi, the demon army has been beaten back. Tai City has also been saved. You don't have to worry." City Lord Tai Yi immediately sobered up. His spirit was lifted and he asked in disbelief, "Is what you said true? The demon army has really been beaten back? Are the people of Tai City safe?" Ji Tianxing nodded and patiently explained to him, "The demon army that invaded Tai City was ordered by the experts of the non-humankind. Those non-humankind experts were all martial saint experts. You and these generals were all affected by the soul-controlling technique of the non-humankind, and their souls were controlled by them." After City Lord Tai Yi heard this, he suddenly realized. He was pleasantly surprised and scared. He bowed excitedly and expressed his gratitude to Ji Tianxing. "On behalf of all the people of Tai City, I thank Benefactor for your help. If not for Benefactor's help, Tai City would have been destroyed long ago. I haven't asked for Benefactor's name, so that I can remember it in my heart." Ji Tianxing didn't hide it and said honestly, "My surname is Tianxing, and this is my wife, Yun Yarrow." City Lord Tai Yi, we learned that the demon army had invaded the 72 cities and specially came from the Pillar of Heaven's mountains to rescue them. However, we still need your cooperation and assistance to help us find out more information. City Lord Tai Yi immediately opened his eyes wide and stared at Ji Tianxing in disbelief. He was so excited that his whole body trembled. After a long time, he came back to his senses and nodded without hesitation. I didn't expect that young Master Ji would come to Tai City. I apologize for my rudeness. Young Master Ji cares about the people. With a benevolent heart and extraordinary martial skills, you saved the people of each city. It is really a great fortune for the 72 cities. We will never forget such kindness. As long as you have any orders, I will go through water and tread on fire without hesitation. Ji Tianxing didn't waste any more time. After exhorting a few words of advice to City Lord Tai Yi, he left with Yun Yao. City Lord Tai Yi stood on the ruins and bowed respectfully. He watched as Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao disappeared into the horizon. After a long time, he suppressed his excitement and woke up the other generals and nobles to deal with the aftermath. Of course, he remembered Ji Tianxing's instructions. He organized the scout camp immediately and let the scouts go around to find out more information. In the next few days, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao had been running around. The two of them sneaked into one city after another and killed the foreign race guards and demon army who stayed in the city. In just 4 days, the two of them had rescued 8 cities and killed over 30 non-humankind guards, as well as over 200,000 demon race soldiers. They were really invincible. No one could stop them. The leaders and commanders of quite a few cities were planted with soul-controlling magic by the non-humankind, and became the non-humankind's puppets. After Ji Tianxing killed the foreign race guards and eliminated the demon army, he still had to cast the technique to save the city lords and generals. After the city lords woke up, he told them his identity and purpose and asked them to help him find out more information. The city lords and leaders of the cities were grateful to him. How could they refuse his request? This way, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao could always get the latest news and know the movements of the surrounding 20 cities. The two of them were very convenient. They could always attack accurately and quickly. Even when Anu was furious when he heard the news and came to take revenge on them with his battleship, the two of them cleverly avoided him. They didn't meet Anu face to face, but they kept cutting off his wings and weakening his forces. Anu was very angry and troubled, but he couldn't do anything. A few days later, the news of Ji Tianxing and his wife killing the demon army and rescuing the major cities spread in the 72 cities. The cities that weren't invaded by the demon army also knew about this. Thus, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao's fame spread in the major cities. Chapter 2297. The night was dark. Anbei City was deathly silent. Occasionally, the roars of night owls and wild beasts could be heard from outside the city. The city was pitch black. Only the area where the Devil Clan was stationed could be lit. In the slightly dilapidated City Lord's mansion, the meeting hall was brightly lit. Anu, dressed in silver armor and a scarlet cloak, was leaning on the large throne at the head of the table. 8 guards dressed in black armor stood in 2 groups in the hall. The atmosphere was heavy and oppressive. Everyone's mood was heavy and their expressions were ugly. After all, what had happened in the past few days had dealt a heavy blow to them. After a long silence, Anu finally opened his mouth to speak. He looked coldly at the entrance of the hall and stared into the dark night. He asked in a low voice, "What's the current situation? How many people do we have left? How many cities do we have?" The guard captain, who was missing 2 legs, respectfully lowered his head and answered in a hoarse voice, "My lord, in this half a month, we have taken down a total of 18 cities. When we attacked these cities, we sacrificed over 60,000 demon warriors. But now, 12 cities have been rescued, and 42 of our people have died. Out of the 500,000 demon warriors, only 130,000 remain. Many of them are crippled and have suffered heavy injuries." Anu's expression became even darker. His hands crushed the armrest of the throne. In other words, we only have 10 guards and 130,000 demon trash left to guard the remaining 6 cities. The 8 guards in the hall felt his monstrous anger and immediately lowered their heads even more. The guard captain said in a trembling voice, "That's right. However, we have successfully plundered a large amount of resources, worth at least 800 million spirit stones. What's the use of that?" Yu was extremely angry. He slapped the table in front of him. Suddenly, the jade table broke into pieces, turning into a pair of pieces that splattered everywhere. Some of the pieces were too strong. When they hit the guards, they did not dare to move. Yu stood up and roared angrily, "The resources and wealth that the humans have accumulated can only be used by them. There is very little that can be used by our race. So what if we have taken down so many cities and plundered so many useless resources? Our brothers are dead. 42 of them were killed. When I came to this world, I only brought 80 people with me. During this period of time, more than a dozen of them had died. With the addition of these 42, I only have about 20 guards left. Not to mention invading the 72 cities, it's hard to say if we can even defend the North Underworld Mountain." The thunderous roar reverberated throughout the hall, causing everyone's eardrums to hurt. The 8 guards lowered their heads like ostriches, not even daring to breathe. After a while, when Yu's anger had subsided a little, the leader of the guards mustered up his courage and said, "Sir, it's all that bastard Ji Tianxing's fault. Our brothers were killed by him. Unfortunately, he's in the dark while we're in the light. We can't do anything to him. Other than you, none of the brothers can stop him. In this subordinate's opinion, why don't we temporarily abandon these 6 cities and return to the North Underworld Mountain?" Of course, Yu was incomparably embarrassed. He was so angry that he almost vomited blood. "Ji Tianxing, you goddamn bastard. One day, I'll skin you alive and chop you into pieces." Yu's eyes were burning with anger as he cursed hysterically. When his anger had subsided a little, he ordered with a dark face, "We can't continue like this. If we spread our forces to the 6 cities, Ji Tianxing will take us down one by one. Immediately return to each city and search for resources and treasures as fast as you can, regardless of the cost. Tomorrow morning, we'll retreat from the 72 cities and return to the North Underworld Mountain." The 8 guards bowed at the same time and said, "Yes, sir." Then, everyone quickly left the hall and disappeared into the night. Yu stood alone in the hall, looking at the night sky with a ferocious expression as he pondered silently. "Ji Tianxing, that bastard, ruined my series of plans. Now, I only have about 20 guards left. I can barely defend the 5 regions of the North Underworld Mountain. I can't expand and invade anymore. I only hope that the ancestor devil god will come out of seclusion later. Give me another 10 months, and I can hold on until the general arrives with the fleet. When that time comes, I'll destroy the North Underworld Mountain and the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and kill everyone. Only in this way can I dispel the hatred in my heart." Yu murmured to himself. The scarlet flames in his eyes flickered fiercely, and his body emitted a strong killing intent. Before dawn, it was the darkest time of the day. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow quietly flew across the night sky and arrived at the sky above a city. This city was located on the grassland. The terrain was vast, and it was prosperous. It had a history of 3,000 years. Moreover, this was the 13th city that the 2 of them had rescued. A few days ago, Ji Tianxing had received news that this city had been invaded. He calculated that this ancient city must be guarded by the devil race's army, and there must be a few guards from the other races. The city lord, nobles, and generals must have been planted with the soul-controlling technique. He was already prepared for a massacre before dawn. Swoosh! He and Yun Yarrow hid in a cluster of dark clouds above the city, observing the situation in the city from above. In the dilapidated city, broken walls and ruins could be seen everywhere. Most of the areas in the city were dark. Only a few areas were lit. However, what puzzled the 2 of them was that the number of Devil Race's warriors guarding the city gate and the city wall was very small. There were at least 1,000 of them. There were no Devil Race warriors patrolling the city. The outside of the city lord's mansion was also empty. Many warriors of the human clan gathered their courage and walked onto the streets, searching for traces of the demon clan. The terrified and despairing commoners also gathered in groups of 3 to 5 as they discussed in whispers. Ji Tianxing released his soul consciousness to check the situation in the city lord's mansion. The result was even stranger. There was no aura of the devil race's guards in the mansion. There were only a few dozen devil race warriors guarding the main doors. Ji Tianxing immediately frowned, murmuring in confusion, "Strange. The devil race's guards and the devil race's army are all gone. Did they get the news and run away in advance?" Yun Yarrow frowned and thought for a while. She nodded and said, "It's possible. These days, we've attacked many cities and killed more than 30 devil race's guards and more than 200,000 devil race's guards. And you can't hold on any longer. He doesn't want to be defeated one by one, so he can only take his people and retreat." Ji Tianxing showed a playful, cold smile, nodding and saying, "Our plan has succeeded. We've forced Yu and the devil race's army to retreat. If he continues to occupy those cities, those devil race's guards will be killed by us sooner or later." Chapter 2298. Since the alien guards and the demon army had retreated, it proved that Ji Tianxing's plan had succeeded. The two of them sneaked into the city and landed directly in the city lord's mansion. The demon warriors guarding the gate and passage immediately rushed over with a murderous aura. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a dazzling golden light, instantly killing a large number of demon warriors. The two of them swaggered through the gate and walked toward the meeting hall. During this time, 2 more groups of demon warriors rushed over to intercept them, but they were also casually killed by Ji Tianxing. When he and Yun Yarrow walked to the entrance of the hall, there were only a dozen or so demons left in the city lord's mansion. They all fled in fear. Ji Tianxing couldn't be bothered to chase after them. After all, the glass-fire dragon was wreaking havoc in the city, hunting down those demons everywhere. At this moment, a white-haired old man rushed out of the meeting hall, leading a dozen or so experts in armor and brocade clothes. These were all human experts. The white-haired old man had reached the tribulation transcendence realm. Everyone's expressions were a little abnormal, and there was a dark red line between their eyebrows. Ji Tianxing knew at a glance that these people had been affected by the soul control technique, and their minds were controlled by the alien guards. Even though the alien guards and the demon army had retreated, Ji Tianxing could guess that the alien guards must have given these people some orders before they left. As expected, after the white-haired old man and the dozen or so human experts rushed out of the meeting hall, they roared and charged over, surrounding the two of them. Ji Tianxing frowned and couldn't help but mutter, "Although we know that these people have been affected by the soul control technique and their minds are controlled by the alien race, we are here to save them. We are here to save them, and they treat us as if we killed their father. No matter how I think about it, it's awkward." Yun Yarrow chuckled and comforted him. "You know that they have been affected by the soul control technique and can't do anything about it. This is not their intention. Why bother with them?" As the two of them spoke, they each used their capturing techniques and captured the dozen or so experts in the blink of an eye. What happened next was very simple. Ji Tianxing, starting with the white-haired old man, cast a spell on everyone one by one, dispelling the mysterious energy in their bodies. The whole process lasted for an hour. Over 10 human warriors showed all kinds of ugly behaviors, twisting and twitching in pain. Fortunately, after an hour, the white-haired old man woke up first. Ji Tianxing immediately knew that this person was the city lord. The dozen or so experts were the generals guarding the city, or the leaders of the aristocratic families and sects in the city. When they were fighting against the invasion of the devil army, they were knocked out by the non-humankind guards, and silently fell under the soul-controlling magic. They couldn't remember what happened after that. They were basically in a muddle-headed state. Now that they had woken up, they finally understood the evil deeds of the demon army and the other races. At the same time, he also understood how lucky he was to be saved by Ji Tianxing. Such a lucky thing was enough for them to brag and show off for the rest of their lives. Ji Tianxing didn't waste any more time. He explained the whole story, and then left with Yun Yarrow while the others respectfully sent him off. In this hour, the glass-fiery dragon had killed more than 1,000 demon soldiers, cleaning up the remaining demon army in the city. The couple rode the glass-fiery dragon, disappearing into the sky shortly. At the same time, the sky was getting brighter. A new day had arrived. The city lord and the high-ranking officials started to clean up the mess. Hundreds of thousands of people in the city who were lucky enough to survive also walked on the street happily. Within 2 days, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yaro rode the glass fiery dragon and explored 5 cities. The situation of each city was similar. The city walls and gates were broken, and the cities were full of ruins and ravines after the war. Hundreds of thousands of people were scared and desperate. They were hiding in their homes or underground, shivering and waiting for their fate to end. However, the devilish army and foreign race guards stationed in the city had already retreated. Before they left, they emptied the treasure vaults of the city, as well as all kinds of resources and valuables. Only a small number of demon soldiers were left. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, they all ran away quietly. After Ji Tianxing and Yun Yaro arrived, they only needed to rescue the city lords and the high-ranking officials who were under the soul-controlling technique. Then, they had completed their mission. The damage they had caused couldn't be recovered. The 2 of them could only comfort the city lords and the high-ranking officials. They could start over and recuperate for many years. Then, they would be able to restore their vitality. The high-ranking officials and the people in the cities understood this, so they weren't too upset or desperate. It was lucky enough that they could keep their lives and didn't have to be slaves of the demon army. People were also grateful to Ji Tianxing and Yun Yaro. They admired them to the extreme. No matter which city they went to, once they revealed their identities, they would be warmly welcomed and courteously welcomed by the people. Moreover, many people knew about Ji Tianxing's deeds as they passed the news between the cities. Thus, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yaro became the great heroes and saviors of the 72 cities. Tens of millions of martial artists and people regarded the 2 of them as their second parents. They respected them to the extreme. On the morning of the 3rd day, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yaro entered the last city, Anbei City. Previously, a new had occupied this place and used it as a temporary base. Therefore, the 2 of them used this place as their last stop. Reality proved that Anu didn't leave any backup plans or traps. Since he had already decided to retreat, he wouldn't cause any more trouble. In any case, he had fought with Ji Tianxing and Yun Yaro before. In the end, he couldn't kill Ji Tianxing. In the dilapidated Anbei city, only a mess of ruins was left. The twisted and broken ground was left, and there were many broken walls. Hundreds of thousands of people had spontaneously organized themselves and were searching for the injured in the city, repairing the collapsed buildings, and rebuilding their homes. Only the city lord's mansion was quiet. No one came out to preside over the overall situation, nor did anyone plan to deal with the aftermath. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yaro entered the city lord's mansion and casually asked 2 guards to get the answer. It turned out that the city lord, a few nobles, and generals were all in a muddle-headed state. Not only did they not listen to their subordinates' suggestions, but they also ignored government affairs. They just meditated in their rooms every day and seemed to have nothing to do. Moreover, the guards privately spread rumors that the city lord and those nobles seemed to be a little mentally unstable. However, people only dared to discuss such things in private and didn't dare to spread it publicly. When Ji Tianxing and Yun Yaro heard this, they understood what was going on. Therefore, Ji Tianxing directly stated his purpose for coming. He found the captain of the guards and led him to the city lord of Anbei City. When the captain of the guards found out about Ji Tianxing's identity, he was overjoyed. It was as if he had seen his savior and was extremely emotional. He agreed without hesitation and led Ji Tianxing to the city lord's residence. In the end, the moment the 2 of them stepped through the door, they were attacked by a white-haired old man. The black-robed old man with a head full of white hair was the city lord of Anbei City. After sending the captain of the guards flying with a palm strike, he charged at Ji Tianxing without caring about his own safety. Ji Tianxing frowned and casually threw out a giant golden palm to capture the city lord. Chapter 2299. An hour later, the Anbei city lord, the nobles, and the generals woke up one after another. Everyone asked the guards and understood what had happened. They immediately felt ashamed and regretful. After knowing Ji Tianxing's identity, Everyone was pleasantly surprised and felt that it was unbelievable. The same situation happened again. The Anbei city lord and the nobles bowed respectfully to express their gratitude and admiration to Ji Tianqing. Everyone's mood was very excited, and their words were also very sincere as they urged Ji Tianqing to stay. For the past half a month, Ji Tianqing had to face the same scene almost every day and was already numb to it. He did not want to waste time, so he rejected the Anbei city lord and the nobles' invitation and urged everyone to deal with the aftermath as soon as possible. The Anbei city lord and the nobles felt that it was a pity, but they did not dare to force it. They could only send Ji Tianqing and Yun Yarrow off respectfully. Riding on the glazed fire dragon, the couple turned into a streak of fire and disappeared into the horizon. Everyone stood there for a long time before reluctantly turning to leave. The glazed fire dragon flew across the sky and headed south. Ji Tianqing and Yun Yarrow stood side by side on the dragon's back and looked at the sky in front of them. Yu and the demon army had been forced to retreat. The crisis of the 72 cities had been resolved, so the two of them felt much more relaxed. Although we were delayed for half a month and suffered heavy injuries, it's all worth it now. Yun Yarrow revealed a gratified smile and said in a relaxed tone. Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "That's right. Our plan succeeded. All our previous efforts were worth it. Not only did we save the 72 cities, but we also protected the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and dealt a heavy blow to Yu. After this, Yu suffered heavy losses and his subordinates were greatly weakened. It will be difficult for him to cause any trouble in the future." Yun Yarrow said with a playful smile, "Yu and the demons are very similar. They are both greedy and bloodthirsty plunderers. It's very difficult for the two to reach a true cooperation. Previously, Yu's strength was strong and had some value to the demons. Now, Yu did not have many guards left, and his strength was pitifully weak. I reckon that the devil race will no longer cooperate with him and will even attack him soon to recover the 5 southern regions as soon as possible." Ji Tianqing nodded to show his agreement. He sneered, "The demon race and the alien races are not kind people. If the conflict between them intensifies and both sides suffer, that would be great." As soon as his voice fell, a spiritual light flew over from the distant sky and landed in front of him. After the dense brilliance dissipated, a light green communication jade slip was revealed. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and said, "Yu and the demon army have already retreated. The crisis of the 72 cities has been resolved. Why is there still someone sending me a message?" Yun Yarrow thought for a moment and persuaded, "Open it and take a look. Maybe there's something else." Ji Tianqing reached out and took the communication jade slip, releasing his divine sense to read its contents. After a while, he frowned, and his expression became somewhat strange. Yun Yarrow revealed a puzzled expression and asked him, "What's wrong, Tianqing? What happened?" Ji Tianqing smiled faintly and said, "The Red Rock City Lord sent me a message, requesting for me to make a trip to Red Rock City. He did not say what exactly it is, but he said that more than 20 city lords have all rushed to Red Rock City and are waiting for me." Yun Yarrow was stunned for a moment, then laughed lightly. "From what I see, you saved so many cities and citizens, and now your name has spread throughout the 72 cities. Most of those city lords are representing the citizens of the city to thank you in person." Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "That's very likely, but there's no need for that. Why do they have to mobilize so many people?" However, more than 20 city lords were waiting for him in Red Rock City, so he had to make a trip there no matter what. Under Ji Tianqing's command, the glass fire dragon changed its direction and flew towards Red Rock City. 8 hours later, the glass fire dragon flew to the sky above Red Rock City and stopped. Ji Tianqing and Yun Yarrow stood on the glass fire dragon's back and looked down at the city below them. Red Rock City, which had a radius of 200 miles, was surrounded by mountains and was entirely built with reddish-brown rocks. When Ji Tianqing and Yun Yarrow first came to the 72 cities, they happened to see the demon army attacking Red Rock City. Thus, Red Rock City became the first city that they saved. The two of them had a deep impression of this prosperous ancient city that was filled with red maple trees. Even though Red Rock City had been ravaged by the flames of war and was filled with ruins and dilapidated walls, The streets and alleys were all in shambles. However, in this half a month, the Red Rock City Lord led the citizens to work together to rebuild their homes, buildings, and streets. Now that Ji Tianxing came to the city again, he realized that most of the ruins had been cleared. The houses and palaces that were destroyed by the flames of war were being rebuilt in full swing. Most of the twisted and broken streets and alleys were also repaired. Ji Tianxing estimated that Red Rock City would be restored to its original state in at most a month's time. However, the loss and death of nearly 1 million citizens could not be made up in a short period of time. At this moment, the citizens in the city saw the glass fire dragon in the sky and immediately cheered excitedly. The guards of the city lord's mansion also hurried into the mansion to report the news. After a while, more than 20 Tribulation Realm experts rushed out of the mansion's meeting hall. The leader was a white-haired old man in golden armor. He was the city lord of Red Rock City, Shoyi Martial Lord. When he saw the glass fire dragon, he was instantly excited and led more than 20 experts into the sky. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In the blink of an eye, everyone arrived in front of the glass fire dragon. They stared at Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow with burning eyes and bowed in unison. "We welcome young Master Ji and Madam Ji." Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow looked over and saw that there were 26 experts on the stage. They were all city lords of various cities. Everyone was excited, full of surprise and anticipation. Ji Tianxing raised his hands and said with a gentle expression, "City lords, you are too polite. Please rise." Shoyi Martial Lord cupped his hands again and said respectfully, "Young Master Ji, Madam Ji, please come to the City Lord's mansion. Let's talk in the hall." Ji Tianxing naturally wouldn't refuse. He let Yun Yarrow put away the glass fire dragon and the two of them landed in the City Lord's mansion together. Shoyi Martial Lord and more than 20 city lords followed closely behind. They followed the two of them into the meeting hall and stood in 2 rows in the hall. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow sat at the head of the table while Shoyi Martial Lord stood respectfully at the side. After everyone quieted down, Ji Tianxing asked, "Shoyi Martial Lord, why are so many city lords gathered here and insist on meeting me face to face?" This. Shoyi Martial Lord hesitated for a moment and swept his gaze across the more than 20 city lords. Seeing that everyone was full of anticipation, he said, "Young Master Ji, to be honest, before you came, we had already discussed it." Chapter 2300. Even though Ji Tianxing was already mentally prepared. But when he heard these words with his own ears, he was still stunned. Seeing that he frowned slightly but didn't interrupt, the Sandleaf Martial Lord mustered up his courage and continued. "Young Master Ji, to be honest, the reason why the 72 cities were able to form their own faction and not fear the invasion of the northern underworld mountain was because everyone was united. Not only did we have 2 alliance leaders, but they were also martial saints, so all the city lords were convinced. However, in the past 200 to 300 years, the 2 old alliance leaders have passed away one after another, and the 72 cities have not been able to give birth to a new martial saint. The city lords fell into a situation where they were without a leader, and they gradually became estranged from each other, lacking help and care for each other. Because of this, when the foreign race led the demon army to invade, we couldn't even take care of ourselves, and one city after another was captured." When he said that, the Sandleaf Martial Lord sighed with a heart full of sorrow. The 20 or so city lords also lowered their heads, their expressions somewhat heavy. The Sandleaf Martial Lord continued, "This time, the 72 cities were invaded by a strong enemy. If it weren't for young Master Ji's help, more than 20 cities in the north would have fallen long ago. Tens of millions of people would have been slaughtered by the demons or reduced to lowly slaves. It was you who saved all of us. We will always remember such a great kindness in our hearts. This time, the demon army was repelled, but it is hard to guarantee that there will be a next time. We, the city lords, are unable to protect the people under our rule, so we can only place our hopes on the pillar of Heaven's mountain." This old man and the city lords earnestly ask young Master Ji to be merciful and take in the 26 cities in the north. After saying that, the Sandleaf Martial Lord knelt on one knee in front of Ji Tianxing and bowed deeply. The other 25 city lords also knelt down and bowed, shouting in unison, We earnestly ask young Master Ji to be merciful and take in the 26 cities in the north, protecting 50 million people. A deep and vigorous voice converged into a mighty sound wave, echoing in the great council hall. Everyone knelt on the ground. If Ji Tianxing didn't speak, they wouldn't get up. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing slowly stood up and said with a solemn expression, "City lords, there is no need to be so courteous. Please rise." The sand-leaf martial monarch raised his head and looked at him. With a sincere tone, he said, "Young Master Ji, this is our greatest wish. It is also the wish of the 50 million people. If you don't agree, we will kneel for a long time." Ji Tianxing immediately frowned and said with a solemn tone, "Martial monarch Shay, city lords, even if you keep kneeling here, it's useless. Give up on this idea. I helped the 72 cities to resolve the crisis and fight against the alien race and the demon race army. It was not only out of righteousness, but also to protect the pillar of heaven's mountains. A long time ago, many city lords came to the Huanglong Daoist and expressed their desire to submit to the pillar of heaven's mountains, but they were all rejected by me. Now that chaos is about to break out, I will also be caught in the eye of the storm and will be unable to fend for myself. They didn't even have enough spare energy to protect the pillar of heaven's mountains, so how could they have the energy to protect the 72 cities? So, everyone, please give up." After saying that, Ji Tianxing brought Yun Yarrow and walked towards the entrance, preparing to leave. More than 20 city lords were stunned on the spot. Their faces were filled with regret and disappointment, and the light of hope in their eyes was also extinguished. The sand-leaf martial monarch hurriedly followed Ji Tianxing and pleaded with a sincere tone, "Young Master Ji, please wait. We know that this is too abrupt and that we have extravagant hopes in our hearts. But we have no choice. In order to protect the 50 million people under our rule, we have no choice but to do this. Young Master Ji, everyone knows that you are benevolent and virtuous, and you care about the people of the world. Could it be that you have the heart to watch the people of the various cities tremble under the iron hooves of the demon race and wait for the fate of death?" Ji Tianxing had just walked to the entrance of the main hall when he heard the sand-leaf martial monarch's words. He stopped in his tracks. He didn't turn around and said solemnly, "It's not that I don't want to save them, but I don't have the strength to do so. I don't dare to give the people hope and promise. If the demon race army comes south in the future and invades the 72 cities, disaster will befall again. If I have the spare strength, I will definitely come to save the people of the various cities. Other than that, everyone should think about how to strengthen themselves and strengthen their defenses." After saying that, he didn't stay any longer and left the city lord's mansion with Yun Yarrow. The sand-leaf martial monarch and more than 20 city lords all stood up and walked out of the main hall. Everyone stood in the spacious courtyard and looked up at Ji Tianxing and his wife flying away on the dragon. They were all filled with regret as they shook their heads and sighed and began to discuss. The glazed fire dragon flew across the sky at lightning speed and headed straight south. It was evening, and the dim yellow sunset shone on Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow. Their figures were hazy, as gorgeous and glorious as gods. Yun Yarrow turned her head to look at Ji Tianxing's side profile and asked calmly, "Why did you reject the requests of those city lords? As long as you agree, with your current reputation and status, the 72 cities will be under your command, and the power of the pillar of heaven's mountains will also be doubled." Ji Tianxing looked at the sky calmly and said with an indifferent expression, "Merging the 72 cities into the pillar of heaven's mountains may seem to expand the territory and power, but it's actually asking for trouble. The 72 cities have just experienced the flames of war, and those cities have been plundered clean. Nearly 10 million people are stranded outside, and it will take a lot of money and time to deal with the aftermath. Moreover, the 72 cities are close to the North Underworld Mountain, and they may be invaded many times in the future. If I accept the 72 cities, I have the responsibility and obligation to protect them. When the disaster really comes, I won't be able to split myself, so how can I protect them?" Yun Yarrow nodded and said with a smile, "Seems like you have already thought it through. This is also good. We only need to protect the foundation of the pillar of heaven's mountains." Ji Tianxing turned his head to look at her and asked with a smile, "Yarrow, Seems like you plan to stay in the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and not return to the Luotian mountain. Yun Yarrow nodded and said, I won't return to the Luotian mountain for the time being. I have been cultivating in seclusion in the Luotian mountain for so long, and it wasn't easy for me to reach the martial sage realm. I can accompany you to travel the world, so how can I stay there? In the future, I will follow you, and no matter what hardships we face, we will fight side by side, and we will be inseparable. Ji Tianxing replied and nodded with a smile. He reached out and pulled her into his arms. The two of them snuggled intimately, standing on the back of the dragon and facing the setting sun, their shadows were elongated. On the morning of the third day, the glazed fire dragon carried Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow back to the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. In the half a month that they were away, the Huanglong Daoist and a few elders were filled with worry. Fortunately, every 2 to 3 days, the scouts of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains would send back news. The Huanglong Daoist and the elders had already known about Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow exterminating the demon clan and saving the 72 cities, and they were happy and proud of it. Chapter 2301. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow returned to their residence, freshened up, and changed their clothes. Not long after, the voice of a guard came from outside the door. Young master, the great immortal wants to see you. Ji Tianxing had expected that Huanglong Daoist would ask to see him, so he said calmly, take him to the study and wait. I'll be there soon. The guard acknowledged and retreated. Ji Tianxing asked Yun Yarrow to stay in the room to rest, and he went to the study alone. He passed through a corridor and just as he stepped into the study, Huanglong Daoist came up to him. Disciple pays his respects to master. Huanglong Daoist saluted respectfully. Ji Tianxing nodded, sat down on the big jade chair, and asked, What's the matter, Huanglong? Huanglong Daoist stood in front of him and said unhurriedly, Master, we already know what you and your wife have done in the 72 cities. Not only that, but the news that you killed many foreign race guards and annihilated 300,000 devil soldiers has also spread on the continent. Now, the martial arts world is talking about this matter and they respect you very much. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said indifferently, hundreds of thousands of devil soldiers invaded the 72 cities. After all, it's a big deal on the continent. It's normal for the news to spread. Is there anything else? Huanglong Daoist smiled and nodded, there's another very important thing. No, it should be said that I have good news to report to master. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows, looked at him in confusion, and asked, What good news? Huanglong Daoist said excitedly, Just yesterday, the scouts of our sect found out a piece of news. It is said that a team of explorers from the vast divine kingdom found a secret land by chance when they were adventuring in the ruins of God. The secret land had a powerful seal, and the design was very wonderful. It was far from ordinary ruins and secret lands. The strength of that group of explorers was not ordinary. There were originally 12 of them, but 9 of them died in the secret realm. The remaining 3 were also severely injured. Battered and exhausted, they fled back to the vast divine kingdom to seek help from stronger forces. That's how the news spread, and it's currently spreading across the continent. After Ji Tianxing heard this, he furrowed his brows and looked disinterested. It's just a secret realm in the ruins of God. How is that good news? The ruins of God is a battlefield left behind by ancient gods. Isn't it very common to see a mysterious and complicated place like this? Huanglong Daoist quickly shook his head and explained with a smile, No, master, the secret realm that was discovered this time is different. This secret realm was called the Illusory Void Secret Realm, and it had a history of 10,000 years. It is said that martial god Nangong used to cultivate and live in the cave when he was alive. It is still in good condition. Martial god Nangong? Ji Tianxing's interest was piqued. He frowned and pondered. He thought for a moment and immediately remembered the news about martial god Nangong. Are you talking about martial god Nangong, one of the overlords from 8,000 years ago, the one who was most proficient in refining divine weapons? Huanglong Daoist quickly nodded, Yes, that's him. Ji Tianxing nodded and said thoughtfully, More than 4,000 years ago, another overlord reached his limit of 10,000 years. He died of old age, and his divine kingdom quickly fell apart. More than 4,500 years ago, martial god Nangong mysteriously disappeared without a trace. In the following decades, his divine kingdom also fell apart, and the entire Shunwu continent entered an era of chaos. It was only 3,000 years ago that the Shunwu continent structure was reshuffled, and 3 new overlords were born. They are the 3 divine kingdoms of today. According to the time, martial god Nangong's limit of 10,000 years should have been 4,000 years ago. Huanglong Daoist nodded again. That's right. Ever since martial god Nangong disappeared, he never appeared again. He must have reached his limit and passed away on the spot. In the thousands of years since then, many powerhouses have been investigating this matter. Countless martial saints have dreamed of finding martial god Nangong's cave and obtaining his divine inheritance, as well as the many divine weapons he had refined when he was alive. Now, someone has finally found a secret realm in the ruins of God, and it seems to be martial god Nangong's cave. Master, you can imagine how many people have heard the news and are on their way to the ruins of God now. Ji Tianxing didn't say anything. He was secretly guessing something. Huanglong Daoist continued, Master, you are the famous Kenshin, the only person who has ascended in the past 30,000 years, and the God King who has dominated the universe. This disciple knows that you definitely look down on martial god Nangong's cave. In comparison, martial god Nangong doesn't even have the qualifications to be your servant. However, it will take a long time for you to recover to your peak. What you need the most right now is 1 or 2 divine weapons to fight martial god Tianju and the ancestor fiend god. Hearing this, Ji Tianxing couldn't help but nod and say, yes, Master has a body of secret techniques and divine arts, but I don't have any divine artifacts to use. Not only can I not defeat martial god Tianju and the ancestor fiend god, I can't even fight the leader of the other races, An Yu. Previously, he and Yun Yarrow teamed up to fight An Yu because they didn't have any divine weapons. He didn't doubt that if he and Yun Yarrow both had divine weapons, they could definitely defeat An Yu. It would take about 3 years to restore the Sword of Burial of Heaven to divine grade, which was too long. Huanglong Daoist saw that Ji Tianxing didn't object. He continued, Master, now that the 2 martial gods are in seclusion, martial god Luo Shui won't fight with you. As long as you go to the ruins of God, no one can stop you. You can definitely enter the illusory void secret realm and obtain martial god Nangong's treasures and divine weapons. This way, we won't have to be afraid of An Yu and the ancestor fiend god anymore. Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a while, then nodded, yes, I understand what you mean. However, this matter is very important, and it's a little strange. Let me think about it. Huanglong Daoist understood his worries, and said with a smile, if martial god Tianju and the demon race discovered the illusory void secret realm, we have to be careful. However, it was the people from the vast divine nation who discovered it first, and the news also came from there. In my opinion, there shouldn't be any problem. Yes. Ji Tianxing nodded again, and waved his hand, this matter isn't urgent. You can leave now, I'll tell you after I've thought about it. After that, Ji Tianxing got up and left the study, and returned to his residence. As soon as he returned to his room, he saw Yun Yarrow sitting at the table, holding a jade slip in her hand, lost in thought. She only woke up when she heard Ji Tianxing's footsteps. Ji Tianxing glanced at the jade slip, and asked, Yarrow, who sent this jade slip? What's the matter? Chapter 2302. Hearing Yun Yarrow's words, Ji Tianxing immediately smiled. If I'm not wrong, it should be about the illusory void secret realm, right? How did you know? Yun Yarrow asked subconsciously. However, she immediately reacted and said with a smile, oh, Huanglong Daoist came to find you just now to tell you this. Ji Tianxing nodded and sat down beside her. He looked at her with a serious expression and asked, Yarrow, what do you think about this? Yun Yarrow said with a calm expression, I just thought about it. This should be an unexpected situation. It can be considered a pleasant surprise. The news has already spread across the continent. However, only the experts of the 3 divine kingdoms and the various factions know about it. Needless to say, all the martial saints will flock to the ruins of God to explore the illusory void secret realm. After all, the illusory void secret realm is very likely to be martial god Nangong's cave dwelling. This means that martial god Nangong's remains, divine Tao inheritance, treasures, and divine artifacts are very likely to be hidden in the secret realm. This temptation is too great. No martial saint can resist it. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, "So you're saying that we should also go to the ruins of God and try our luck?" Yun Yarrow thought for a moment and said in a serious tone, "You have endless battle experience and vast knowledge. You have mastered thousands of divine arts and secret arts. However, you still need a long time to recover your divine realm. Moreover, you don't have any divine artifacts to use their power. I originally had a reverse water divine sword, but I returned it to divine Lord Luo River last time at the North Underworld Mountain. If not for that, we wouldn't have been unable to defeat Yu when we joined forces. Moreover, martial god Nangong's cave dwelling must have hundreds of mysteries and seals. Ordinary martial saints can't break the seals of the cave dwelling. That's called trying their luck. However, we are different. With your knowledge and wisdom, you can easily enter." Ji Tianxing thought about it for a moment, then smiled and nodded, "Okay, since you think so, then let's go. In any case, we just ended our seclusion not long ago, so it's not suitable for us to cultivate in seclusion again in the short term. Let's go to the ruins of God and take it as an experience." Yun Yarrow smiled and said, "Even a martial god like Yu can't do anything to us if we join forces. We can go anywhere in the world." Ji Tianxing urged, "Since we've decided, we'll set off tomorrow morning. Before I leave, I still have some things to take care of. You should rest first." Then, he left the room alone and entered the secret chamber. Opening the secret door in the corner of the secret room, he went through the dark tunnel and landed in the Star Divine Furnace underground. The silver divine flames in the divine cauldron surged like waves. A black boulder that was as large as a mountain and more than 100 miles long was quietly floating in the furnace. On the left and right sides of the boulder, the Black Dragon and Qian Yu were tirelessly using secret techniques to refine the boulder. This boulder was the star crystal core. It had shrunk by 30%, and was only 140 miles long. The surface of the star crystal core, which was originally dark and rough, had become much smoother, and silver light spots could be vaguely seen. The Black Dragon and Qian Yu had been busy, and although they were tired, they still refused to rest. After careful observation, Ji Tianxing found that their strength had increased a lot, and their magic power had become more vigorous and profound. He was very satisfied with this result and was very gratified. He praised the Black Dragon and Qian Yu, and he also personally taught them how to cast spells. In this way, not only could he increase their efficiency in refining the star crystal core, but he could also increase their strength faster. 1 hour later, Ji Tianxing left the Star Divine Furnace. When he returned to the room, Yun Yarrow was already sitting cross-legged on the bed, and she began to meditate. Ji Tianxing didn't delay any longer and sat beside her to meditate. The night passed silently. The next morning, Ji Tianxing was the first to end his cultivation. He found the Huanglong Daoist and told him his decision. When the Huanglong Daoist learned that he was going to the ruins of God, he was both happy and worried. He hurriedly said, "Since Master has decided to explore the illusory void secret realm in the ruins of God, it will definitely be a smooth journey and you will return with a full load. Master, please don't worry. I will guard the pillar of heaven's mountains firmly and won't let you have any worries. However, all the martial arts masters on the continent may rush to explore the ruins of God. Even if Master and Mistress are very powerful, you must be careful. I will wait for your safe return." Ji Tianxing patted him on the shoulder and didn't say anything. He turned around and left. A quarter of an hour later, he and Yun Yarrow rode the glazed fiery dragon and flew into the sky as fast as lightning, heading northwest. The pillar of heaven's mountains was not far from the ruins of God. With the speed of the glazed fiery dragon, they could arrive there in 3 days. However, after Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow entered the ruins of God, they still had to continue flying northwest. After all, the illusory void secret realm appeared in the northwest of the ruins of God, next to the fallen God Lake. The communication jade slip sent by Granny Long contained a lot of information about the illusory void secret realm, including its location. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow came for the illusory void secret realm. They didn't want to cause any trouble on the way, So they went straight to the Fallen God Lake. The Fallen God Lake in the northwest of the ruins of God was a huge lake with a radius of 200,000 miles. It hadn't dried up for tens of thousands of years. This lake originated from the ancient times. It was said that it was created during the War of the Gods. There was also a sad but touching legend about the origin of the Fallen God Lake. Since they were bored on the way, Ji Tianxing told Yun Yarrow about the legend while chatting with her. After hearing it, Yun Yarrow was a little touched. She said calmly, although there are thousands of legends in the world, most of them are absurd and bizarre. However, legends that have been passed down for tens of thousands of years from the ancient times are definitely traceable. I'm 80% sure that it's true. Ji Tianxing nodded. He didn't talk about the Fallen God Lake anymore. Instead, he changed the topic to Nangong martial god. According to historical records, Nangong martial god was only obsessed with two things in his life. One was martial arts, and the other was artifact forging. Although he established a divine nation and was one of the overlords of the continent, he was tired of power long ago. I once read in the unofficial history that Nangong martial god was an infatuated man. When he was young, he met a beautiful woman who was as beautiful as a fairy. She was noble, elegant, and pure. In order to pursue that beautiful woman, Nangong martial god didn't hesitate to betray his sect and abandon his family's power. He only wanted to wander the world with that beauty, enjoying the pleasures of the world. However, the good times didn't last long. The two of them lived in seclusion overseas for more than 20 years. However, they offended a top force in the Eastern Sea. The leader of that force wanted to snatch his wife as a concubine. The two sides fought fiercely. Nangong martial god was seriously injured and fled. In order to protect her reputation and purity, his wife didn't hesitate to commit suicide. Her body and soul were destroyed. Since then, Nangong martial god never married again. He also didn't fall in love with any woman. Chapter 2303. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow only treated the legend of Nangong martial god as a story and did not pay too much attention to it. After all, their goal was to enter the illusory void secret realm and obtain Nangong martial god's treasures and artifacts. On the evening of the sixth day, the sun was setting in the west. The glazed fire dragon carried Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow across the vast Fallen God Lake and arrived at the northern shore. The glazed fire dragon stopped in the sky above a mountain range that stretched for tens of thousands of kilometers and was more than 10,000 meters tall. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow stood on the dragon's back and looked at the mountains in front of them, silently observing them. In front of them was a boundless mountain range that was covered in verdant peaks and a boundless forest. Behind them was the vast and boundless Fallen God Lake, which sparkled with light and was tranquil and peaceful. After Ji Tianxing observed for a while, he said calmly, "From the looks of it, the entrance to the illusory void secret realm should be in this region. As for its exact location, we still need to investigate further." Yun Yarrow nodded and said calmly, "We don't need to rush. We can slowly search for it. The illusory void secret realm is protected by a seal. Even if someone finds it before us, they won't be able to break the seal." "That's true." Ji Tianxing smiled. "Even if a few thousand years have passed and the sealing array's power has weakened, it still has the might of a deity. There are less than 3 martial saints in the entire Shunwu continent who can break a deity's sealing array." As the two spoke, they rode on the glazed fire dragon and flew into the depths of the mountains. Along the way, the two released their divine senses to cover 1,000 kilometers and carefully investigate every corner. Along the way, the two saw a few groups of martial sacred realm experts flying across the sky. These martial saints were traveling in groups. Some had 2 or 3 people, while others had 4 or 5 people. Some were walking in the air, their bodies streaking across the sky like flowing lights. Some of them were riding on powerful spirit beasts or flying magic treasures. When the crowd saw the glazed fire dragon, they slowed down and could not help but take a few more glances. On the Shunwu continent, there were very few people who had a divine dragon as a mount. Of course, the martial sages from all over the world did not dare to get close to the glazed fire dragon. Everyone had a tacit understanding and didn't greet each other. Once they found the entrance to the illusory void secret land, conflicts might erupt between them. Between them, there was actually a competitive and hostile relationship. Deep in the mountains. At the peak of a mountain that was 2,000 feet tall and lush with lush trees. 4 luxuriously dressed experts with extraordinary bearings were standing on top of a towering ancient tree, overlooking the surrounding mountains. There were 4 young martial artists, 2 men and 2 women. They were all very handsome and beautiful. The leader was a tall young man wearing a golden dragon robe and a luxurious gemstone crown. His face was handsome but a little pale. His eyes were malicious and contained a bone-chilling coldness. If Ji Tianxing was present, he would definitely be able to recognize at a glance that this person was Heaven End Divine Nation's Grand Divine Son, Yuan Zhan. The other 3 young experts were Marshal Saint Qing Shan, Marshal Saint Chen Yu and Marshal Saint Chao Ying. The 3 of them stood separately, but with Yuan Zhan as the center, vaguely showing a clustered attitude. Yuan Zhan looked into the distance and narrowed his eyes slightly, hiding a never-melting coldness. He said in a low voice, "I will never forget the tragic scene of Yuan Chong dying in the void platform. In the past few months, my evil name has spread all over the continent and I have been criticized and despised by millions of martial artists. And all of this is because of Ji Tianxing. Even if I cut him into pieces and put him to death, it won't be able to quell the hatred in my heart." His resentful tone was full of cruelty and murderous intent. Marshal Saint Qing Shan nodded and stroked the thumb ring on his left hand with his right hand. He sneered and said, "Your Highness, don't worry. The Divine Master's plan is absolutely flawless. No matter how cunning Ji Tianxing is, he will definitely be fooled and obediently come here to die. Just now, I received news that someone discovered traces of Ji Tianxing near the fallen god lake. He and his wife Yun Yarrow came here on a glazed fire dragon and are searching for the entrance to the illusory void secret realm." Marshal Saint Chen Yu, who was wearing a pink floral dress, also said with a face full of hatred, "Back in Wangtian City, that bastard Ji Tianxing humiliated me in every possible way. I will never forget this enmity. In this operation, I will definitely kill him with my own hands and tear his mouth apart." Marshal Saint Chao Ying was the only one who was still calm. He said with an indifferent expression, "Although the 4 of us are working together, we are still not a match for Ji Tianxing and his wife. Your Highness, has Marshal Saint Liu Shui arrived? When will he meet us?" Yuan Zhan nodded and said in a low voice, "Father gave him full authority to handle this matter. How can he be later than us? However, he is with the Alliance Master and has to command another group of people. He has no time to meet us." Hearing these 2 sentences, everyone was stunned and showed an expression of disbelief. The Alliance Master is also here? Didn't he admit defeat and stop following Ji Tianxing? Marshal Saint Qing Shan asked subconsciously. However, he immediately reacted and did not continue speaking. After all, he was very clear that for experts of this level, all bets and promises were child's play. The winner takes all. Marshal Saint Chao Ying raised her eyebrows and asked with interest, "Other than us, there is another group of people. Could it be those clans and forces that are dependent on the divine nation?" Yuan Zhan shook his head and sneered, "Of course not. The clans and forces that are dependent on the divine nation also sent 4 martial saints. However, they are not the main force. The real main force is the other group of people that we have never seen before." Everyone vaguely guessed that since it was a martial saint expert that they had never seen before, it was most likely a hermit expert. Marshal Saint Chen Yu frowned and could not help but exclaim, "If that's the case, don't we have more than 10 martial saints? In order to deal with Ji Tianxing, is it worth mobilizing so many people and more than 10 martial saints?" Yuan Zhan glanced at her and sneered, "Mobilize so many martial saints? Do you know that even if we have more than 10 martial saints, we are not fully confident that we can kill Ji Tianxing? In order to kill Ji Tianxing, how much did Father pay? Even this illusory sky secret realm will be exposed to the world." Everyone was secretly speechless and did not speak. At the same time, they were even more in awe and fear of Ji Tianxing. Similar thoughts appeared in everyone's mind. How strong is that guy? Why is the Divine Master so cautious? More than 10 martial saints joined forces to deal with him, but they are still not fully confident. How strong is his strength and methods? If we fail this time, won't we become the laughingstock of the entire continent? Ji Tianxing's name will spread throughout the continent and reach the peak. Chapter 2304. At the same time. In the depths of the towering mountains. On a lone peak that was more than 10,000 feet high, the mountain was precipitous and covered with rocks. 5 experts who were dressed strangely but had a dignified aura were standing on a patch of grass and talking quietly. The leader of the group was a hunchbacked old man with white hair. He was dressed in grey linen clothes and was leaning on a black wooden cane. Even though his body was stooped, his cloth shirt, cloth shoes, and long grey hair were clean and tidy, not a single hair out of place. The other 4 powerhouses did not dare to slight him in the slightest. All of them had a respectful attitude towards him. Among the 4 experts, 3 were middle-aged men and 1 was a charming and enchanting woman with a noble aura. The man on the left had a handsome face. His hair was tied up in a bun and he wore a feathered crown. He wore a white robe with silver threads and carried a half-meter-wide sword case on his back. This person's eyes were like lightning and his aura was as sharp as a sword. He was obviously a sword Dao martial saint. The middle-aged man standing in the middle was not tall and was slightly plump. His skin was also very white and tender. He was dressed in a green robe and wore a square gemstone crown. He looked very amiable. At first glance, he looked like a rich man in the secular world. Although his appearance was ordinary and inconspicuous, his aura was long and deep. He was obviously a martial saint expert. The most eye-catching person was the 3rd middle-aged man. This person was nearly 10 feet tall and was burly like an iron tower. His skin was bronze and his muscles bulged. He was full of violent strength. Moreover, he was not wearing a robe but a dark red tiger skin jacket. On his shoulders was a dark gold python skin cloak. Even the lower half of his body was only wearing a pair of short leather pants with dragon scales. His wide feet were bare. From head to toe, this person was filled with a wild, unrestrained aura. But it just so happened that there was an enchanting and charming woman beside such a boorish and barbaric man. This woman was tall and had a hot body. Her face was exquisite and beautiful. She looked like a woman in her 20s. She was wearing a long golden dress that was more than 10 feet long, and a luxurious crown that was studded with gems on her head. Her entire body was exuding a unique charm and nobility. In her clear eyes, a pair of soul-sucking eyes inadvertently revealed a natural charm. She was a peerless beauty that was charming, dignified, and enchanting. She could really be called a stunner. If Ji Tianxing were here, he would definitely be able to recognize him at a glance. This enchanting woman was Empress Tantai Xian. When she stood next to the man clad in animal skin, it was like a living beauty standing next to a beast. The contrast was too obvious. The other 2 middle-aged men were very envious of the man in animal skin. They glanced at Tantai Xian from time to time, scanning her half-exposed chest. The 2 towering snow-capped mountains were too eye-catching. The hunchbacked old man in the lead gazed at the setting sun with a deep gaze as he spoke in a low voice. Since we've decided to leave the North Sea and enter the Shunwu continent, there is no turning back. This operation can only succeed, failure is not allowed. Only by killing Ji Tianxing and completing the mission can we take back the lunar star paradise that belongs to us. I've had enough of Mount Fengling. The hunchbacked old man was very old, and he had lived for at least 3,000 to 4,000 years. He had been born in the lunar star paradise, but he had encountered an unforeseen event when he was young. He had left with the 3 great families and migrated to the North Sea's Mount Fengling. He had not returned to the lunar star paradise for more than 3,000 years. The white-robed man with the sword case nodded in agreement and said to the hunchbacked old man, "Master Tong, please rest assured. We know that this is your lifelong wish, and it is also the long-cherished wish of the 3 great families. Since I am the Jiang family's young master, I will do my best to complete the mission and achieve the clan's goal." The middle-aged fat man in green robes nodded and said confidently, "We haven't set foot on the Shunwu continent for more than 3,000 years. I'm afraid that the world has long forgotten the prestige of the 3 great families. In this operation, I, Helian Wuzhua, will let the martial saints of the world witness the methods of the Hellion family. The tall and sturdy man in the animal skin jacket stroked his beard and grinned. He. It's too much for Xian to accompany me in Mount Fengling. No matter what, I will crush Ji Tianxing's head and take back the lunar star paradise from martial god Tianju. When the time comes, I will build the most gorgeous crystal palace for my Xian. After saying that, the tall and sturdy man looked at Tantai Xian with a doting expression and reached out to pinch her pretty face. Tantai Xian smiled charmingly and hugged his arm even tighter. However, no one noticed that a faint smile flashed in the depths of her eyes. It was a little playful. The Jiang family's young master and Hellion Wuzhua looked at the tall and sturdy man at the same time and teased him with envy. Brother Tuoba, you are so lucky to have won Miss Xiana's heart. You should give her a status and a palace to repay her. Tuoba Da, you are also very lucky to have Miss Xiana give herself to you. If Miss Xiana had met with danger in the Yin ruins, I would have been the one passing by. Now that she has given herself to you, the person she wants to repay is also me. Miss Xiana following a monkey-rearing boorish man like you is simply a waste of God's gift. A fresh flower stuck in cow dung. Tuoba Da was not angry. Instead, he laughed even louder and hugged Tantai Xian's waist even tighter. Ha ha ha. Jiang Qi, Hellion Wuzhua, the two of you are just jealous of me. Don't be fooled by your looks. When it comes to serving women, I am better at it. If you don't believe me, you can ask Xian. What can I do? Who asked me to be so rich? As he spoke, Tuoba Da lifted up his animal skin jacket and revealed his bulging dragon skin shorts. Jiang Qi and Hellion Wuzhua looked at him with disdain and quickly changed the topic. You are so vulgar. You are so vulgar when you have a beauty beside you. You are dirtying the scenery. Seeing that the two of them had turned their heads away, Tuoba Da laughed even louder. Ha ha ha. Why are the two of you pretending to be decent? We grew up together. I have seen the big and small of you. Now I have hit your sore spot, right? Seeing that he was getting more and more explicit, Jiang Qi and Hellion Wuzhua did not dare to continue the conversation. The two of them looked at the mountains in the distance and pretended to talk about how beautiful the scenery was and how nice the weather was. Tantai Xian also pretended that she did not hear anything. She looked at the sunset calmly. But deep in her eyes, there was a deep sense of disdain and disgust. At this time, the hunchbacked old man spoke in a low and dignified voice. All right, stop fooling around. The three family heads cannot come personally. The three of you are the most outstanding geniuses and the future candidates for the family heads. You should be calm and steady. I just received news from Yi Liu Shui that the target has appeared. We should start moving. Chapter 2305. Night had fallen. The rolling mountains were sleeping under the night sky, quiet and gloomy. There were no stars in the sky. Only dark clouds drifted by, and the biting cold wind whistled. The glazed fire dragon carried Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow and flew over the mountains at a moderate speed. 2 whole hours passed. The two of them searched an area with a radius of 30,000 miles, but they did not find the entrance to the illusory void secret realm. However, during the search, they encountered several groups of martial artists who were in a hurry. Those martial artists were in groups of 3 to 5. There must be 1 or 2 martial sages among them, and the rest were all tribulation transcendence experts. Even martial lords in the 5th or 6th level of the tribulation transcendence realm could only be the guards and attendants of the martial sages. Everyone knew that only martial sages were qualified to explore the illusory void secret realm and obtain the treasures of Nangong martial god. Those tribulation transcendence realm experts were just here to join in the fun, broaden their horizons, and try their luck. Very quickly, another 4 hours passed. It was midnight. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow searched an area with a radius of 50,000 miles, but they still did not find the target. Therefore, the glazed fire dragon temporarily stopped and floated in the clouds. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow looked at each other and frowned in confusion. According to the news circulating outside, the entrance to the illusory void secret realm is nearby. We have searched an area with a radius of 80,000 miles. Logically speaking, we should find it soon, right? Ji Tianxing frowned and looked around. His deep eyes shone brightly. Yun Yarrow nodded and comforted him gently. Don't worry. We have plenty of time. The person who finds the entrance first may not be the first to enter. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and said, we don't have enough information. We can observe the movements of others. Maybe we can find the entrance faster. That's good. Yun Yarrow nodded in agreement. Then, the glazed fire dragon continued to fly in the night sky. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow checked the surroundings. At the same time, they were also paying attention to the movements of others. An hour later, a dazzling golden light flew over from afar. It rushed into the depths of the mountain range as fast as lightning. Ji Tianxing turned his head and saw a flying ship about 100 meters long wrapped in the golden light. The flying boat was in the shape of a shuttle, and its surface was engraved with mysterious patterns. Its shape was very exquisite. Without hesitation, he teleported over and turned into a ball of dazzling starlight, blocking the front of the flying boat. The flying boat that was galloping did not slow down in the slightest and directly crashed into Ji Tianxing. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing furrowed his brows. Without hesitation, he raised his right hand and struck out with a dazzling golden palm. Boom! With a muffled sound, the mountain-sized golden palm grabbed the flying boat and held it firmly in its palm. The incomparably violent impact was also neutralized by the giant golden palm. Even though the flying boat flashed with golden light and unleashed a powerful force, it was still unable to break free from the grasp of the giant palm. Ji Tianxing grabbed the flying boat back in front of him and controlled the giant palm expressionlessly. He gradually crushed the flying boat, causing it to constantly deform and shrink. If he did not stop, the flying boat would be crushed into a pile of debris in 10 breaths at most. At this moment, the door of the flying boat opened, and 2 figures hurriedly flew out. Swoosh swoosh. 2 tall and beautiful figures appeared in front of Ji Tianxing. They were 2 beautiful young girls in long green dresses. They were about 18 years old and had long black hair that draped over their shoulders like a black waterfall. What surprised Ji Tianxing the most was that the 2 young girls in green had the same appearance and eyes. They were a pair of twin sisters. The 2 young girls in green had a frosty expression. They glared at Ji Tianxing angrily, their clear eyes flashing with anger and ferocity. Hey! You bastard! Why are you blocking our way? Despicable guy, we have no enmity with you. Why are you attacking us? The 2 sisters questioned at the same time. Their voices were clear and melodious, very pleasant to listen to. Even their angry rebuke had a hint of playfulness and lightness. Ji Tianxing looked at the 2 of them without changing his expression. He was about to open his mouth and explain his purpose of coming. At this moment, Yun Yarrow rushed over on the glazed fire dragon. She came to Ji Tianxing's side and looked at the twins with a gentle expression. She said in a calm tone, "Sisters, please forgive us for disturbing you. Tianxing doesn't mean any harm. He just wants to ask you some questions. Unfortunately, you don't have any intention of stopping, so he resorted to this." Yun Yarrow was originally a noble and elegant fairy. Now that she had been pregnant for many years, she had a bit of motherly radiance. When the twins saw her, they were stunned. When they heard her gentle words, the anger of the 2 sisters immediately dissipated. The 2 of them glared at Ji Tianxing angrily and couldn't help but mutter, What a rude guy. How hateful. This sister is really good at talking. For her sake, we won't argue with you." Ji Tianxing almost couldn't help but roll his eyes. He thought to himself, even if Yarrow is popular, is my popularity so bad? What do you mean by not arguing with me for her sake? You 2 look so weak. What do you have to argue with me? The twins were still young. They were still a little childish, and their strength was only about the 3rd stage of the crossing calamity realm. If Ji Tianxing was a bad guy, he could kill the 2 of them in one move. Yun Yarrow easily won the favor of the 2 sisters and started chatting with them. "Sisters, you 2 are so beautiful and cute. You are even twins. It's really rare in the world. What are your names? Who is the elder sister and who is the younger sister?" The 2 sisters answered in unison, "My name is Qingqing, and her name is Qingqing. I am the elder sister, and she is the younger sister." Their voices were the same. The speed and tone of their speech were also the same. After speaking, the two of them looked at each other. They pouted unhappily and frowned. Seeing this scene, Yoon Yarrow was amused. Hee. It seems that the two of you are very interesting. May I ask, why are the two of you in such a hurry? Did something happen? Ching, who was on the left, quickly nodded and said with a worried face, Sister guessed right. We did encounter some trouble and were in a hurry to save Master. Originally, Master brought us here to search for treasures. But on the way, Master met an enemy. She separated from us temporarily and led the enemy away alone. Not long ago, Master sent a message saying that she defeated the enemy, but the enemy fled to the entrance of the mystic realm. The enemy's accomplices were there. Now, Master is besieged by them. I don't know if she is alive or dead. When Ching was talking about her experience, Yi secretly gave her a look, indicating that she should not say anything. After all, the two of them were not familiar with Ji Tianqing and his wife. It was not appropriate for them to reveal their real experience. However, Yoon Yarrow's appearance, temperament, and demeanor were too fair alike. Chapter 2306. After listening to Ching's words, Ji Tianqing and Yoon Yarrow looked at each other. Their master actually knows the location of the secret realm's entrant. The two of them transmitted their voices to each other at the same time and said the same thing. The two of them could see that the twin sisters were obviously inexperienced and naive. This kind of young and immature martial artist was bound to suffer all kinds of setbacks in this unpredictable world of martial arts. However, they were lucky enough to meet Ji Tianqing and Yoon Yarrow. At least, the couple would not harm the twin sisters. Yoon Yarrow said to Ching, no wonder you are in such a hurry. Your master is in a tight encirclement. It is indeed worrying. My husband has damaged your flying boat, which will definitely delay your journey. How about this? Let us send the two of you to find your master. Consider it our compensation. Seeing that she took the initiative to invite them, Yi frowned and subconsciously wanted to refuse. However, Ching stared at the glazed fiery dragon without blinking. Her eyes were full of curiosity and expectation. She only thought for a moment and simply nodded in agreement. Sister, since you are so kind to invite us, we will naturally accept your invitation. May I ask what kind of dragon this is? Is it your mount? Ching. Yi quickly grabbed Ching's arm and gave her a look. She transmitted her voice to her. Ching, how can you trust others so easily? Have you forgotten Master's instructions? What if these two are bad people or Master's enemies? Aren't we sending lambs to the tiger's den? Ching pouted and said hesitantly, Master told us to watch more and talk less when we are outside. We can't have the intention to harm others, but we must be vigilant. However, this sister is very nice. I have carefully observed her eyes. She is definitely not a bad person. Moreover, with their strength, if they really had evil intentions, we would have been killed long ago. Why won't you listen to me? Yi could not help but stomp her feet. She was angry and anxious. However, Ching ignored her and flew to the back of the glazed fiery dragon with Yoon Yarrow. She looked around curiously. Ji Tianqing remained silent and returned to the dragon's back. Seeing this, Yi hesitated for a long time before flying onto the dragon's back and landing beside Ching. Of course, she had been holding onto Ching's arm and was secretly guarding against Ji Tianqing. She was afraid that he would suddenly turn into a vicious thug. On the way, Ching kept chatting with Yoon Yarrow. She asked all sorts of questions like a curious baby. Yoon Yarrow answered her patiently. Her expression and tone were always gentle, making people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. An hour later, Ching had become familiar with her and completely trusted her. She had completely let down her guard. Ji Tianqing knew that Yoon Yarrow had a natural advantage when it came to gaining the trust of others. Unlike him, who was excessively handsome and heroic, yet also extremely mysterious, which always made people doubly wary of him. Since that was the case, he decided not to interrupt and continued to look at the scenery. Very quickly, 2 hours passed. Under Ching's guidance, the glazed fire dragon flew continuously for more than 70,000 miles and stopped in the sky above a large canyon. This was a huge canyon that was tens of thousands of miles long and spanned from north to south. On both sides of the canyon were towering mountain ranges that were as high as 30,000 feet, covered by a lush forest. On one side of the canyon, there was a steep cliff that was tens of thousands of feet high, revealing a large area of grayish-brown rocks. The canyon was bottomless and was covered by a thick white fog, making people unable to see the situation at the bottom of the canyon. Ji Tianxing and the others stood on the dragon's back and looked down at the canyon below. Qing Qing looked around anxiously and muttered to herself, "Master was besieged near here. I wonder how she is now and where is she?" When Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow heard this, they understood that this canyon was the entrance to the illusory void mystic realm. Both of them released their divine senses and probed into the canyon to conduct a thorough search. At this time, Yi took out a communication jade slip. "Instead of worrying here, why don't we send another message to Master and ask about her specific location?" As she spoke, she was about to enter a message into the jade slip. However, Ji Tianxing, who had been silent all this while, suddenly spoke. He frowned and looked at the north end of the canyon. He said calmly, "There are powerhouses fighting 3,000 miles ahead. Let's go and take a look." Qing Qing was instantly energized and her eyes were filled with hope. "Really? Then it's very likely that it's Master." Yi hesitated for a moment and put away the jade slip. She decided to go and take a look first. Swoosh! The glazed fire dragon flew over the canyon and turned into a golden flame, heading toward the north. In just a few minutes, it had flown 3,000 miles away. At this time, Ji Tianxing, Yun Yarrow, and the others could see that there were a few powerhouses fighting in the sky 100 miles ahead. There were a total of 4 people, all of whom were martial sages. However, they were divided into 2 groups. One of the groups consisted of 3 people. There was a white-haired old man, a middle-aged man with a dignified appearance, and a hideous old woman in a black robe. The 3 of them waved their Dharma treasures and weapons, casting spells that covered the sky and covered the sun. They surrounded and attacked a middle-aged woman in a dark purple dress. The middle-aged woman was not tall and her face was a little thin. Her long hair was tied up in a high bun and she wore a green jade daoist crown. She held a wash-basin-sized jade slip in her left hand and a silver-white sword in her right hand. She was casting spells with all her might to defend herself. However, her clothes were ragged and covered in blood. Her face was also covered in blood. She looked rather pathetic. Facing the pincer attack of the 3 martial sages, she could only retreat and fight at the same time. She did not dare to fight them head-on. Her Dharma power aura was also fluctuating violently and somewhat chaotic. It was obvious that she was at the end of her rope and was only holding on with her last breath. At most, she would be defeated miserably and killed by the 3 martial sages on the spot in 15 minutes. Qing Qing and Yi Yi's bodies shook when they saw this scene, and they revealed a complicated expression of joy, grief, and indignation. "Master! Master, don't panic. We're here to save you," the 2 of them shouted in a crisp voice. They pulled out their swords almost at the same time and rushed out without caring about their own safety. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing immediately frowned. "These 2 silly girls, how could you interfere in a battle between martial sacred realm experts?" Yun Yarrow also frowned. 2 rays of silver light shot out from her hands and turned into 2 giant palms, grabbing at Qing Qing and Yi. Swoosh! Qing Qing and Yi had just flown 1,000 feet away when they were caught by the 2 giant palms and pulled back onto the back of the glaze fire dragon. Yun Yarrow looked at the 2 of them and said in a dignified tone, "I can understand your eagerness to save your master. However, if you rush up like this, how is it different from courting death?" Qing Qing and Yi struggled with all their might and asked anxiously, "Then what can we do? Do we just watch our master be besieged by evil people? Sister Fairy, please let us go." Chapter 2307. Qing Qing and Yi were twin sisters. On the night they were born, their entire family had been exterminated by their enemies. The 2 infant sisters had fallen into a sea of fire and were about to die. At the critical moment, the Puhua martial saint had passed by and righteously saved them. Later on, the martial saint had brought them back to Mount Puhua in the East Sea, where he had personally raised them and cared for them. For 20 years, the two sisters had never left Mount Puhua. They had lived a carefree life isolated from the rest of the world, which had nurtured their innocent and pure personalities. This treasure hunt in the ruins of God was their first time entering the Shunwu continent. But they had never imagined that such an unfortunate calamity would befall them. They had watched with their own eyes as the Puhua martial saint was besieged by 3 villains. He was riddled with wounds and bleeding profusely. He had been beaten into a retreat, but he had been powerless to help. The two felt as if a knife had been twisted in their hearts, and tears welled up in their clear eyes. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow did not know the inside story. However, they could see that the two sisters' feelings for their master were pure and flawless, and they were as close as mother and daughter. Yun Yarrow looked at the two sisters who were crying their hearts out and could not help but sigh. Then, she turned to look at Ji Tianxing and said, "Tianxing, can you help them? Just treat it as compensation for them." Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow were telepathically connected, so he naturally understood what she meant. She was referring to Qingqing leading the way for them to the entrance of the secret realm. "You're just too soft-hearted." Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded, looking at Yun Yarrow with a doting gaze. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure flashed and disappeared into the sky. Whoosh! In the next instant, he teleported hundreds of kilometers away and appeared behind the 3 martial saints. Heaven-seizing palm. Ji Tianxing growled and raised his hands to unleash 2 mountain-sized golden palms that ruthlessly slammed towards the 2 martial saints. The 3 martial saints were attacking the Puhua martial saint with all their might. They only wanted to kill him as soon as possible and end the battle. They had not been on guard at all, and a stranger had actually interfered in their business. Bang bang! Following 2 muffled explosions, the white-haired old man and the black-robed old woman were struck by the giant golden palm on the spot. They spat out mouthfuls of blood and were sent flying. The 2 of them were only rank 5 martial sages and could not withstand Ji Tianxing's secret skill. They were severely injured on the spot. The 2 of them flew for 30 miles before they managed to stop in the sky, panting heavily. At the same time, the burly and dignified middle-aged man turned his head to look at Ji Tianxing. He shouted in shock and anger, "Who are you? Why are you interfering in our feud? Do you know the consequences of offending the Sunset Alliance?" Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said expressionlessly, "What Sunset Alliance? I've never heard of it." As he spoke, he waved his hand and struck out a huge sword made of stars that could split the heavens and earth apart, slashing down at the middle-aged man's head. The middle-aged man's expression changed drastically, and he quickly teleported away. Shua! In an instant, he retreated 80 miles. However, the huge sword made of stars had locked onto his spiritual soul aura. It also teleported 80 miles and struck him with a bang. The middle-aged man was instantly struck until blood splattered everywhere. He fell rapidly from the sky and crashed heavily into the Grand Canyon. Bang! A loud muffled sound came from the depths of the canyon, reverberating endlessly in the canyon. The ground and the mountains on both sides trembled, and countless rocks fell. At this point, the 3 martial sages had been severely injured by Ji Tianxing. Puhua martial sage was temporarily safe. He flew to 100 steps away from Ji Tianxing and sized him up in shock. "Thank you for saving us, young master. May I know your name?" As he spoke, Puhua martial sage bowed to Ji Tianxing to express his gratitude. Although Ji Tianxing was very young, he had only used 3 moves to severely injure the 3 martial sages. With such terrifying strength, Puhua martial sage did not dare to underestimate him. His expression was respectful. Ji Tianxing cupped his hands and returned the greeting. He said calmly, "It's nothing. Don't mention it." Then, he pointed to the glazed fire dragon not far away and said, "Your 2 beloved disciples are very worried about your safety." Puhua martial sage turned his head to look. When he saw the glazed fire dragon's appearance, his pupils shrank, and shock flashed across his eyes. He then saw Qingqing and Yi on the dragon's back. They were in a petrified state. Their eyes were wide with shock, and their small mouths were slightly agape. There was no trace of worry or anxiety on the 2 sisters' faces. There was only shock and disbelief. Very clearly, Qingqing and Yi both did not expect that Ji Tianxing was actually powerful to such an extent. In the blink of an eye, he had sent the 3 martial sages flying. It was a complete sweep, a complete suppression. Wasn't this too terrifying? Even their most respected and worshipped master was completely defeated by Ji Tianxing. Puhua martial sage glanced at Yun Yarrow, who was beside the 2 sisters, and shock flashed across his eyes. His mind was clear, and he immediately understood that Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow definitely had extraordinary identities. Moreover, it seemed that the 2 sisters had met a benefactor. At this moment, the 3 heavily injured martial sages flew over from afar. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The 3 of them stood still in the sky 1,000 feet away. All of them had ugly expressions, and their bodies were stained with blood. The white-haired old man and the black-robed old woman's internal injuries were more serious, but they did not look miserable on the outside. The middle-aged man in the lead was in a miserable state. His entire right arm was cut off, and blood soaked his long robe. The 3 of them glared angrily at Ji Tianxing and Puhua martial sage. Their expressions were ferocious, and their entire bodies were bursting with killing intent and anger. Puhua, I didn't expect you to hook up with such a young man at your age, the black-robed old woman shouted, full of resentment. The white-haired old man also said sinisterly, Puhua, even if that brat can protect you for a while, he can't protect you forever. You're lucky today, but we'll settle our scores in the future. Sooner or later, your head will be separated from your body. Puhua martial sage's expression immediately turned cold, and he shouted angrily, Black-white double demons, don't slander us. This young master only helped out because he saw injustice. You can only blame yourselves for committing so many evil deeds. The black-white double demons immediately understood that Ji Tianxing was not Puhua martial sage's backer, and they laughed sinisterly. Hey, so it's a nosy brat. Since he's not your lover, then you're dead meat. Just you wait, our alliance will flatten Mount Puhua soon. Puhua martial sage was so angry that he clenched his fists, and his knuckles turned white. Ji Tianxing looked at the black-white double demons with an indifferent expression, and said coldly, What you should do now is to run away with your tails between your legs and disappear from my sight. How dare you provoke me? Are you tired of living? His deep and vigorous voice was filled with an indescribable domineering and majestic aura. The black-white double demons were also suppressed to the point that their aura turned sluggish, and they revealed looks of shame and anger. Chapter 2308. The middle-aged man's words finally infuriated Ji Tianxing. He stared coldly at the middle-aged man as his lips curled into a sneer. Very well, you have successfully worn out my patience. As soon as he finished speaking, Ji Tianxing's figure flashed and teleported out. He turned into a silver light and charged toward the middle-aged man. Whoosh! When he arrived in front of the middle-aged man, he had turned into a giant star sword that was hundreds of feet long, bursting with invincible power. They were not far apart, and Ji Tianxing was too fast. When the giant star sword was in front of the middle-aged man, he suddenly came to his senses and hurriedly retreated. But it was all in vain. Boom! In the deafening noise, the middle-aged man's body was smashed into pieces by the giant sword and turned into a rain of flesh and blood, splashing in the sky. Among the pieces of flesh and blood, there was a blazing white divine soul. It was also cracked by the giant sword and floated in the sky in a daze. The middle-aged man's body was destroyed by Ji Tianxing and his divine soul was severely injured. Then, the giant star sword changed its direction and went toward the old woman in the black robe. The old woman in the black robe was terrified and hurriedly teleported to escape. But she had only flown for about 10 miles when the giant star sword caught up with her and hit her hard. With another muffled bang, the old woman in the black robe was also smashed into pieces of flesh and blood, scattering in the sky. The white-haired old man not far away was already scared out of his wits. He turned around and ran away in horror. He unleashed all the potential he had in his entire life, streaking across the sky as fast as he could, rushing into the white clouds. However, Ji Tianxing teleported hundreds of miles away and caught up with the white-haired old man in the blink of an eye. Swoosh! He waved his right hand and a giant golden sword that was 100 meters long appeared. Boom! The white-haired old man followed in the footsteps of his companions. His body was smashed into pieces on the spot, leaving only his divine soul floating in the sky. Only then did Ji Tianxing stop. Looking at the three divine souls who were fleeing in panic, he said with an expressionless face, "Today, I will spare your lives and destroy your corporeal bodies as punishment. If you let me see you again, even the gods won't be able to save you." Then, he stepped across the sky and returned to the back of the glazed fire dragon. The thunderous sound waves were still reverberating in the sky, displaying an unparalleled domineering aura. The three balls of souls had learned their lesson. They didn't dare to linger for even a moment, nor did they dare to utter a single word. They fled to the end of the canyon in a panic. In the blink of an eye, the three divine souls disappeared into the horizon. It was only now that Puhua Martial Saint regained his senses. He stared at Ji Tianxing, dumbfounded, his eyes wide with shock. Just now, she was the closest to Ji Tianxing and witnessed the whole process with her own eyes. She personally felt Ji Tianxing's terrifying sword intent and mana. At this moment, there was only one thought in her mind. Oh my God! Is this young master a peak martial saint or a martial god? She was a 6th-degree martial saint and had seen the power and means of a peak martial saint. But she was very sure that even a 9th-degree martial saint couldn't be as invincible as Ji Tianxing. After a moment, Puhua Martial Saint regained her senses. She knew that she had lost her composure and hurriedly lowered her head to cover her wound. She staggered towards the glazed fire dragon. Ching and Yi suppressed their shock and hurriedly went up to her. Master, are you all right? The two of them supported Puhua Martial Saint on both sides and asked with concern. Puhua Martial Saint shook her head and said with a weak expression, "Don't worry, I can still hold on." Then, she looked at Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow on the dragon's back and bowed sincerely. "I'm Layman Puhua from Puhua Mountain in the Eastern Sea. Thank you for saving my life. Puhua would never forget such kindness. In the future, if you have any instructions, Puhua Mountain will go through water and tread on fire without hesitation." Ching and Yi bowed together with Puhua Martial Saint, their faces full of gratitude. Now, in Ching and Yi's eyes, Ji Tianxing was no longer a fierce and dangerous villain. In the blink of an eye, he had turned into an unfathomable, powerful, and otherworldly expert. Moreover, this expert had a noble character and helped the weak. He was a great hero that was revered by all. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said calmly, "Layman Puhua, you're too polite. Don't worry about such trivial matters. It's not good to stay here and you're seriously injured. The most important thing now is to find a secluded place to heal as soon as possible." What he meant was that they had to leave. Puhua Martial Saint understood but still reminded him, "Young master, you haven't told me your name. If I want to repay you in the future, I don't know how to find you." Ji Tianxing shook his head and said, "There's no need to repay me. My surname is Ji and this is my wife. Her surname is Yun." Puhua Martial Saint nodded and said, "I will never forget your peerless demeanor. Young Master Ji's breadth of mind is even more admirable." As for the Sunset Alliance, Pu Hua still had to remind the two of them. The middle-aged man just now was the deputy leader of the Sunset Alliance and the black-white double ghosts were the protectors. The Sunset Alliance is the strongest martial arts organization in the Eastern Sea. It has 6 martial saints and close to 100,000 members and pirates. Although you and your wife are both otherworldly experts, the Sunset Alliance's power is not ordinary. It is also an evil sect that does all sorts of evil. The two of you have to be careful. Ji Tianxing smiled disapprovingly. They're just a bunch of useless people, not worth mentioning. If they really dare to take revenge on me, they'll be digging their own graves. Puhua Martial Saint laughed self-deprecatingly and nodded, saying, "That's right. I've worried too much. With young Master Ji's strength and methods, destroying the entire Sunset Alliance is only a matter of time." After saying that, she was about to bid farewell to Ji Tianxing and his wife. However, she hesitated and asked again, "If I'm not wrong, you and your wife are also here for the illusory sky secret realm, right?" Ji Tianxing did not hide it from her and nodded. Puhua Martial Saint smiled and said, "The entrance to the illusory sky secret realm is 800 miles to the north, in a cave at the bottom of a canyon. However, young Master Ji must be careful. There are more than 10 groups of martial saint experts gathered here. I'm afraid there will be a great battle. Thank you for the reminder. Ji Tianxing nodded to express his gratitude. Puhua martial saint did not say anything else and bowed to Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao. After saying goodbye, he turned and flew away with the two sisters. On the way to the depths of the mountains, Qing kept looking back and glanced at Yun Yao reluctantly. However, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao had no intention of asking her to stay. She could only leave with Puhua martial saint with a heart full of disappointment and regret. After the three of them disappeared into the horizon, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao rode the glazed fire dragon and flew towards the north. Not long after, the glazed fire dragon flew 800 miles. Ji Tianxing released his divine sense into the canyon and indeed found a cave at the bottom of the canyon. However, the strange thing was that not only was there a powerful sealing force in the cave, there were also several layers of sealing formations outside the cave. Chapter 2309. In the sky, thousands of kilometers away from the Grand Canyon, Puhua martial saint was flying high in the sky with Qing and Yi. She was preparing to leave the Grand Canyon, which was filled with powerhouses, and find a secluded place to heal her injuries. However, she kept frowning as she hurried along. Qing noticed that her master was a little distracted, so she asked, "Master, what are you thinking about?" As a disciple, it was somewhat inappropriate and rude for her to ask her master so directly. However, the three of them were as close as mother and daughter, so Puhua martial saint did not mind. She pursed her lips and said in a low voice, "I've been thinking. That young master's strength far surpasses that of a martial saint, but he's not a martial god. Who else on this continent could be so powerful? Moreover, he claims that his surname is Ji, and his wife's surname is Yun. I've recalled some legends." Qing and Yi were very unfamiliar with the Shunwu continent, and they knew nothing about it. The two of them immediately became interested and looked at Puhua martial saint expectantly. They asked, "Master, what legends?" Puhua martial saint hesitated for a moment before explaining, "In recent years, I've stepped into the Shunwu continent many times, and I've always heard a name called Ji Tianxing. This person is a legend in the martial world and has created many inconceivable miracles. His reputation has spread throughout the continent, and it can be said that everyone knows of him. It's said that he's young, only in his 20s, but he's already a martial saint. He's the #1 god disciple of the Luoshui divine kingdom and the #1 genius of the human race. He's defeated many peak martial saints and slaughtered millions of demons." Puhua martial saint told the two sisters all the legends she had heard. The two sisters listened attentively, and their expressions became more and more shocked and excited. In the end, the two of them could no longer remember how many stories Puhua martial saint had told them, nor how many miracles Ji Tianxing had created. They only knew that the legendary Ji Tianxing was definitely a monstrous genius that could not be seen in 10,000 years. He was an existence comparable to a god. How could such a monstrous genius exist? After Puhua martial saint finished speaking, she turned to look at the two sisters. Seeing that the two sisters were still in shock and daze, she revealed a smile and said, "Are you shocked by his various deeds?" "That's right, the legendary Ji Tianxing was like a god, so monstrous that it made people feel unreal. Because of this, when I faced that young Master Ji, I didn't think of those legends, nor did I ask for his name. Now that he thought about it, that young Master Ji could very well be the legendary Ji Tianxing. Only a heaven-defying monster like him could possess a fairy-like beauty and have a divine dragon as his mount." Qing and Yi finally came back to their senses and nodded repeatedly like chicks pecking rice. "Yes. Master's guess is right. Young Master Ji is definitely Ji Tianxing. Apart from this answer, I really can't think of a second possibility. That young Master Ji's demeanor and bearing are very much in line with your description of Ji Tianxing. Master, I've always felt that young Master Ji's wife, big sister Yun, is very gentle. She's as perfect as a fairy. If we had known earlier, we wouldn't have left. Wouldn't it have been better if we had stayed with them?" Qing, how can you think like that? Big sister Yun didn't ask you to stay. How can you have the nerve to stay by her side? The two sisters were talking all at once. Ching was still regretting that she didn't have the nerve to stay. Puhua Marshal Saint looked at the two of them and shook his head with a wry smile, saying, "You two, stop arguing. It's completely meaningless. Young Master Ji is willing to lend a hand and help me resolve this crisis. This is already a great favor. How can you ask for more? Moreover, young Master Ji and young Lady Yun are a fairy-like couple. What do you two look like by their side? A maid? Or a maid?" Ching pouted disapprovingly and muttered in a low voice, "It's fine even if we're treated as their maid. For such powerful and perfect people like them, who knows how many people would want to be their maid?" Yi immediately rolled her eyes and said unhappily, Ching, can't you be a little more mature?" Puhua Marshal Saint smiled wryly again and said with a somewhat self-mocking tone, "Do important people like them need maids and maids? Moreover, the two of you are inexperienced and don't understand the ways of the world. You'll only cause trouble by following them. Alright, let's not talk about this. Let's find a place to heal first." Not long after, Puhua Marshal Saint found a remote place and began to circulate his energy to heal his injuries. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow stood on the dragon's back and looked down at the cave at the bottom of the canyon. The cave wasn't big and was only 100 feet in radius. The surroundings were full of cracks and it was obvious that it had collapsed naturally. 5-colored divine light surged in the cave, emitting a majestic and mighty aura. Outside the cave were piles of rocks. The ground and mountain walls were inlaid with magic treasures and spirit stones to maintain the operation of the formation. A layer of gold and a layer of red light shield protected the cave tightly. Other than that, Ji Tianxing also detected that there were 3 layers of ceiling formations at the cave entrance that hadn't been activated yet. There were a total of 5 layers of seals and all of them were saint-level formations. Strange, who would set up 5 layers of defensive formations here and seal the cave? Ji Tianxing couldn't help but frown after observing for a while. Yun Yarrow said without hesitation, "It should be those martial saints who arrived first. They were afraid that others would enter the secret realm, so they did it on purpose." Ji Tianxing revealed a contemptuous sneer and said, "What's the use of setting up a seal outside the cave? If we can't break the god-level seal inside the cave, everything will be in vain." Yun Yarrow nodded and said, "This is human nature. We don't want others to get what we can't get." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, "There are only 3 groups of people here. Let's take advantage of the fact that most of the martial saints haven't found this place yet." Yun Yarrow glanced at the 3 groups of people outside the cave and nodded, saying, "That's good too." After saying that, she put away the glazed fire dragon and followed Ji Tianxing to land among the rocks outside the cave. 2 middle-aged men stood at the entrance of the cave and stared at the defensive light shield with full concentration. They were using their divine senses to examine it carefully. Suddenly, they heard footsteps behind them. The 2 of them immediately turned around and looked sharply at Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow. Seeing the 2 of them walking over, the middle-aged man in golden armor asked angrily, "What do you want?" Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a cold smile and said, "What else can people who have come here do?" The other burly man in purple robes said with a hideous smile, "Boy, you don't know the rules. Do you know what first come, first served means? You just arrived and you want to cut the queue. Don't you see that the other 2 groups of people are still waiting?" As he spoke, he pointed at the piles of rocks on both sides. There were 2 groups of people standing on top of the 2 piles of rocks. There were a total of 6 cultivators, 2 martial saints and 4 martial monarchs. They were all looking at Ji Tianxing with angry faces. Ji Tianxing immediately laughed and shouted domineeringly, "What rules? I am the rules." Chapter 23:10. The 2 middle-aged men obviously did not expect Ji Tianxing to be so arrogant. After being stunned for a moment, the 2 of them came back to their senses. Immediately, they revealed hideous smiles and a strong killing intent burst out from their bodies. "Kid, you're too arrogant. Humph, there are really some hotheads who are not afraid of death." As they spoke, the 2 of them took out their swords and magic weapons at the same time and rushed toward Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow with murderous intent. "How dare you snatch my territory? You're courting death. Kid who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, I'll let you know now that there's always someone better than you." As they shouted angrily, the two of them waved their swords and slashed out an overwhelming amount of sword and saber radiance that shrouded Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao's figures. Ji Tianxing did not even use the sword of burial of heaven. He directly raised his palms and slapped out two dazzling golden lights toward the two of them. The golden lights formed into two giant palms and burst out a violent power that instantly destroyed the sword and saber radiance. Bang! Bang! In the muffled sound, the two middle-aged men were hit at the same time. They spat out mouthfuls of blood and flew backward, smashing hard on the golden light shield at the entrance of the cave. Thousands of pieces of golden light were wrapped by the violent force and splashed in all directions. The piles of rocks on the ground outside the cave were also shaken into powder and scattered in the air. The two groups of warriors near the entrance of the cave quickly released their magic power to form a shield to block the violent shockwave. After the dust and sand dispersed, the area within a radius of 10 miles outside the cave became flat and clean. The two martial sages in purple robes and golden armor staggered up from the ground with their faces full of blood. The two of them were angry and shocked. They stared fiercely at Ji Tianxing. Seeing Ji Tianxing approaching step by step, the two of them subconsciously stepped back. However, the golden light shield was behind them and there was no way to retreat. "Kid, you, don't be so arrogant." The purple-robed man held his treasured saber and pointed it at Ji Tianxing. He put on a brave front and shouted, "First come, first served. Only those who can break the ceiling formation can be considered capable. If you break the rules like this, you will become the enemy of all martial sages. You will definitely not have a good ending." The middle-aged man in golden armor also said indignantly, "Kid, even if you're strong, you'll definitely bring trouble to yourself if you provoke everyone's anger. If you leave now, we can pretend that nothing has happened. If you insist on making things difficult for us, then don't blame us for fighting you to the death." Although the two of them sounded tough on the surface, they were actually terrified in their hearts. Ji Tianxing did not take their threats to heart at all. With a contemptuous sneer, he said, "The fish will die, but the net will not break." As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his hands again. Dazzling starlight accumulated in his palms. Seeing that he was about to attack again, the two men's faces suddenly changed. They flew to the left side with fear, and fled in a panic. Of course, it was too shameful to flee with their tails between their legs. The two of them did not forget to say a few words. "Kid, if you insist on doing things your own way, you'll definitely cause big trouble. You're finished. You'll become the target of everyone. Let's wait and see." As soon as they finished speaking, the two of them had already fled 10 miles away. Ji Tianxing waved his hands and shot out two huge starlight swords toward the two men across the air. Bang bang! The starlight swords pierced the two of them fiercely, and two loud, dull sounds were heard. The middle-aged man in golden armor was pierced by the huge starlight swords, and his armor shattered. He fell into the canyon with blood spurting out from his body. The purple-robed man was also hit by the sword light. Blood spurted out from his body, and he let out a shrill scream. The two of them were terrified. They ignored their injuries and hurriedly got up to speed to escape. Ji Tianxing did not chase after them. He watched the two figures disappear into the depths of the canyon. Then, he turned his head to look at the warriors on both sides. When his gaze swept over them, the warriors on both sides were on high alert. They instinctively drew their swords and sabers. Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "I don't want to repeat what I said just now. Get lost." The two groups of warriors were instantly enraged by the humiliation. Their faces were filled with grief and indignation. After hesitating for a while, the two martial sages in the lead suppressed their anger and retreated with their subordinates. After retreating for 20 miles, the two groups of people stopped and hid in the woods and among the rocks. They looked at Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao from afar. Of course, they were not willing to leave just like that. They were just hiding not far away and waiting for an opportunity. Once Ji Tianxing broke the formation and something unexpected happened, they would definitely take the opportunity to attack and hit him when he was down. When Ji Tianxing saw that the two groups of people were showing weakness, he ignored them and walked to the entrance of the cave. He used the secret technique of the divine eye, causing his eyes to turn dark gold. He stared at the golden light shield at the entrance of the cave without blinking. The scene he saw immediately changed. The dazzling golden light shield turned into a huge fishing net. It was made up of thousands of golden threads. Those were the veins and structure of the ceiling formation. Ji Tianxing focused on observing the formation. His brain was also working quickly to analyze the formation structure and deduce a way to break it. Yun Yarrow stood beside him. Her divine sense covered the surrounding 300 miles. She was secretly on guard. Once someone approached and tried to harm Ji Tianxing, they would definitely be stopped by her. Soon, 15 minutes passed. Ji Tianxing finally saw through the ceiling formation and deduced a way to break it. He raised his palms and started to cast spells. He shot out rays of 5-colored brilliance and injected them into the golden light shield. Under his control, the 5-colored brilliance entered the golden light shield and quietly changed the veins of the formation. In just a few short minutes, the first ceiling array formation was broken by him. The dark gold defensive light shield melted quickly like snow under the sun. Ji Tianxing didn't stop there. His eyes glowed with golden light as he stared at the second ceiling formation. He stared at the dark red light shield with full concentration. He observed and analyzed the formation structure and deduced a way to break it. As time passed, the canyon became darker and darker. At the same time, a few more martial saints arrived at the canyon and landed near the entrance of the cave. There were a total of 6 martial saints. They were divided into 3 groups and stood dozens of miles away from the entrance of the cave. They secretly observed for a while before flying toward the entrance of the cave. However, they were quickly stopped by 2 groups of martial artists. The 2 groups of martial artists were very angry. They told the 6 martial saints that the entrance of the secret territory had been occupied by Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow. No one could even think of approaching them. Otherwise, they would infuriate Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow and bring about a fatal disaster. These 2 groups of martial artists had been humiliated by Ji Tianxing before. They were angry but did not dare to say anything. Therefore, they deliberately exaggerated and fanned the flames to provoke the 6 martial saints. The 6 martial saints were indeed enraged. They were full of anger and were full of hostility toward Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow. Isn't that kid too arrogant? Does he want to be everyone's enemy? The illusory sky secret territory is martial god Nangong's cave. The fated ones can get it. Every martial artist in the world has a chance. What right does he have to occupy the entrance? We are all martial saints who have been famous for many years. What kind of world have we not seen? How can we be intimidated by a kid and not move forward? Chapter 23:11. After 15 minutes, Ji Tianxing finally saw through the second array. He was about to use a secret technique to break through the dark red defensive light shield. At this moment, more than 10 martial artists flew over from both sides and landed on the empty ground outside the cave. 8 martial sages and 4 martial lords surrounded the cave entrance in a half-moon shape, surrounding Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow. Seeing that they had come with ill intentions, Yun Yarrow's face turned cold, and her eyes shone with a cold light. She took 2 steps forward with an indifferent expression, shielding Ji Tianxing behind her, and looked at the crowd with a sharp gaze. Swoosh! A silver light flashed in her hands, and 2 silver-white swords appeared, exuding an extremely sharp sword aura. Yun Yarrow waved her right hand, and a blazing white sword radiance appeared, drawing a half-moon-shaped gully on the ground in front of the crowd. Whoever dares to cross this line will be killed without mercy. Yun Yarrow pointed at the crowd with her sword and shouted coldly with an expressionless face. Such an arrogant and domineering attitude immediately angered the crowd. In particular, the older martial sages were even more furious. They were so angry that they started laughing. Haha, little girl, you're too arrogant. You want to make everyone your enemy? You're overestimating yourselves. It's understandable that you're young and frivolous, but people as arrogant and ignorant as you are really pitiful. You want to intimidate us by drawing a line? Do you think we're 3-year-old children? These martial sages came later. They had different appearances, but they were all dressed luxuriously and had an extraordinary aura. After all, they were all tyrants who dominated a region. They were martial arts leaders who had been in high positions for a long time, or the rulers of an empire. Yoon Yarrow was too lazy to argue with them. She held 2 swords and looked at the crowd coldly, ready to launch a thunderous attack at any time. At this moment, an old man with white hair and a beard walked out of the crowd. He stroked his beard with his left hand and held a purple jade ruyi in his right hand. He stepped over the line on the ground and walked toward Yoon Yarrow with an arrogant expression. "I'm going to cross this line. Let's see what a little girl like you can do to me." The white-haired old man sneered. His expression was filled with contempt and mockery. Yoon Yarrow immediately frowned. She swung her sword as fast as lightning, sending out starry sword lights that filled the sky. "Take responsibility for your own life and death." Following her cold shout, the more than 90 starry sword lights formed a sword formation with a radius of 3,000 meters and pressed down on the white-haired old man. Swish! Swish! In an instant, sword chi burst out within the gorge with dazzling brilliance, causing one to be unable to open their eyes or breathe. The white-haired old man didn't hesitate either. His left palm struck out with surging golden flames, while his right hand waved the purple jade scepter, sending out dozens of dark purple lightning arcs. The moment he struck, he displayed the strength of a 6th-degree martial saint and used the power of thunder. Peng peng peng! With a series of muffled sounds, the golden flames and lightning arcs that filled the sky were immediately crushed into pieces by the sword light. More than half of the sword light was shattered, but there were still more than 30 of them left. They enveloped the white-haired elder, leaving him nowhere to hide. Bang 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 bang! Another series of muffled sounds was heard. The white-haired old man was hit by more than 10 swords. Instantly, blood spurted out and he let out a painful scream. The violent impact immediately exploded, sending the sand and stones all over the ground flying. The white-haired old man was sent flying 10 miles away and fell miserably into the gorge. By the time he got up from the ground, his face was already covered with blood and there were more than 10 wounds on his body. Blood kept gushing out, dyeing his white robe red. His entire body was covered with mud and he looked rather miserable. He no longer had the demeanor of a reclusive expert. The other 11 martial saints and martial monarchs were also shaken by the impact, their faces pale. Everyone retreated and tried their best to resist the impact. Only then did they dissipate the power of the impact. Yoon Yarrow didn't chase after them. She stood at the same spot and looked coldly at the crowd. She shouted in a deep voice, "This is only a warning. If anyone wants to die, I'll fulfill his wish." The crisp and cold voice reverberated in the gorge, shaking the hearts of the dozens of practitioners. The 4 martial monarchs quietly retreated, their eyes filled with deep fear. However, the martial saints were even more furious and ashamed. They all exploded with a strong fighting spirit. "Damn you, bitch. You've gone too far. I'll kill you." The white-haired old man flew back as fast as lightning. His face was as gloomy as ice. He crazily charged at Yoon Yarrow. He made a mysterious seal with his left hand and condensed a giant axe the size of a mountain with a dark golden light. It fell from the sky and chopped at Yoon Yarrow. He waved the purple jade ruyi with his right hand and shot out 9 Zedian dragons toward Yoon Yarrow. The other 7 martial saints were also filled with righteous indignation. They roared in unison and brandished their swords and sabers toward Yoon Yarrow. "They're too arrogant. Everyone, let's join forces and kill them. This adulterous couple is the scum and disgrace of the martial world. Let's join forces and get rid of them for Tianqing. No matter how strong they can't stop us. Everyone, let's attack together." Suddenly, everyone waved their swords and sabers, which covered the sky and the sun. They poured toward Yoon Yarrow like a torrential flood. No matter how strong Yoon Yarrow was, it was impossible for her to block the joint attack of 8 martial saints. She would definitely be careless and might even be injured. However, Ji Tianqing stopped casting and suddenly turned around. A fierce murderous intent flashed in his eyes. He held the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand. An unparalleled domineering aura burst out from his body. He attacked with all his might. Swoosh! Swoosh! He shot out a golden dragon claw as big as a mountain from his left palm. It smashed the giant axe that fell from the sky and sent 2 martial saints flying. He waved the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand and shot out 49 starry sword radiances, which destroyed the martial arts light that filled the sky. More than 20 sword radiances were shattered. The other 20 starry swords hit 4 martial saints hard and sent them flying. Yun Yarrow also used her unique swordsmanship. The 2 martial saints were covered with wounds. Blood spurted out from their bodies. They screamed and flew away. In the blink of an eye, the 8 martial saints were sent flying more than 10 miles away. They fell into the valley and smashed into the rocks and ruins. Everyone was seriously injured. There were hideous wounds on their chests and backs. Dark red blood kept gushing out and staining their clothes. However, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow stood at the entrance of the cave unscathed. Their bodies were full of chilling murderous intent. The husband and wife joined forces and defeated the 8 martial saints easily. Such terrifying strength made the 8 martial saints and 4 martial monarchs show deep fear. They were angry and humiliated. Everyone got up from the ground and glared at Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow. Damn bastards. You are so domineering. Sooner or later, you will be besieged and hacked to death by everyone. Young people, the Jianghu is very big and the waves are even bigger. You are so unscrupulous. Soon, you will be overturned. I am waiting to see your end. Hee hee. There are at least a dozen martial saints rushing here. Let's see how long you can last. I keep feeling that these 2 people are familiar, especially that white-robed guy. He's so young, but he's so strong. He's definitely not a nobody. Some people cursed angrily. Some people were waiting to watch a good show. Some people were guessing the identities of Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow. Chapter 23:12. These martial sacred realm experts had been through hundreds of battles, and had survived countless trials and tribulations. Being able to bend and endure humiliation were basic skills that they had honed over the years. They knew very well that martial artists who were brave for a moment would often die young. Only those who knew their limits and knew when to advance and retreat could live long and have the last laugh. After saying a few harsh words, the crowd dispersed and split into 5 groups to stay in the canyon. While treating their injuries, they stared at Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow at the entrance of the cave. They believed that as long as they preserved their strength and waited patiently, they would find a chance to take revenge. Seeing that everyone had left, Ji Tianxing did not waste any more time. He turned around and continued to break the array. Yun Yarrow held the silver moon twin swords and stood beside Ji Tianxing. She was on guard with a cold expression. The arc she drew on the ground was like an invisible wall that blocked all the martial artists. No one dared to get close. 15 minutes later, Ji Tianxing cast hundreds of seals and finally broke the second seal array. The dark red flame barrier immediately collapsed and disintegrated. On the surface, the entrance of the cave looked empty. There seemed to be no obstacles. However, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a silver light, activating the third defensive array. Swoosh! A 5-colored barrier appeared out of thin air at the entrance of the cave, enveloping half of the mountain wall. He then cast the God's Eye secret technique and carefully observed the sacred array, thinking of a way to break it. The canyon was silent. The sun in the sky was about to set. The canyon was dark and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Waves of coldness kept coming. After about an hour, Ji Tianxing finally deduced the correct way to break the array and started to cast the secret technique. At this moment, a few figures flew over from the clouds above the canyon. Swoosh! Swoosh! After the 5-colored brilliance faded, 5 figures with different figures appeared. They were 5 martial sages. The leader was a white-haired hunchback elder with a walking stick in his hand. It was Lord Tong. The other 4 martial saints were relatively young. There were 3 men and 1 woman. The man in the white robe and carrying a large sword case was the young master of the Jiang family, Jiang Qi. The slightly plump middle-aged man in the green robe was Helian Wuzhua. The other 2 were Beauty and the Beast. Tuoba Da was wearing an animal skin jacket and a pair of flood dragon skin shorts. Tantaizian was wearing a golden dress, looking both enchanting and dignified. The 5 of them stood in the white clouds and looked down at the cave at the bottom of the valley. Soon, they saw the situation clearly. That's strange. There are clearly several groups of people present. Why aren't they fighting? Jiang Qi frowned in confusion. Helian Wuge were also found it strange. He said in a playful tone, "Those people are all martial saints. They are actually hiding in the dark and observing. Are the people of the Shenwu continent so modest?" Tuoba Da stroked the full beard on his face and said with a cold smile, "Didn't you see that those few groups of martial artists were all injured? It seemed like they had already fought and lost. As for the winner, it would definitely be the young man and woman. Otherwise, why would they dare to block the entrance of the secret realm to study the formation?" Jiang Qi and Helian Wuge's gazes immediately gathered on Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao. Ji Tianxing's back was facing the group, and he was fully focused on breaking the formation. Only Yun Yao was holding 2 swords and facing the group with a cold and vigilant posture. When they saw Yun Yao's appearance, Jiang Qi and Helian Wuge were stunned. Their eyes could not help but widen. After a while, the 2 of them came back to their senses. Their eyes shone brightly, and their faces were full of amazement. "Wow! That girl! No, that woman in the white dress, she is so beautiful. How can there be such a beautiful woman in this world? Her beauty is enough to topple a city, and her temperament is cold and otherworldly. She is like a goddess who has descended from the 9 heavens." Jiang Qi held his chest with both hands and looked at Yun Yao with an infatuated expression. He said with certainty, "Helian Wuge, I feel like my heart has been captured by her. I can't breathe. No matter what, I have to have her. You are not allowed to snatch her from me, or else I will fall out with you." Helian Wuge was furious. He scolded without turning his head, "F*CKU, I feel like my soul has been taken away by her. Let's compete fairly, Tuoba Da has no part in it." Tantai Xian did not speak. She looked deeply at the entrance of the cave, at the handsome figure in the white robe. "Nemesis, I didn't expect us to meet again." She looked at the back of the figure with a complicated expression. She muttered to herself, "Back then, I was disheartened and left Shenwu continent. I wanted to go to the North Sea to live in seclusion, even if it meant spending the rest of my life in Fengling Mountain. I didn't expect the world to be so fickle. The people from the 3 aristocratic families were ordered to kill you. After going around in circles, I still ended up here. Is this the will of the heavens? Are you and I bound to be entangled forever?" Just as Tantai Xian was in a daze, the hunchbacked old man, Master Tong, sneered. He used his walking stick to point at Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao at the entrance of the cave. He said in a playful tone, "We came at the right time. That handsome and beautiful young man and woman are the ones we are looking for." Hearing this, Jiang Qi, Helian Wuge and Tuoba Da were shocked. Their expressions became a little strange. Jiang Qi quickly took out a scroll from his spatial ring. He opened it and glanced at it. Then, he looked at Ji Tianxing at the entrance of the cave. This scroll was a portrait given by Yi Liushui. In the portrait was a handsome young man in a white robe. He had sharp eyebrows and bright eyes. He was holding a mysterious black sword. Jiang Qi compared a few times and kept the scroll. He nodded with a cold smile. "That's right, it's him. That beauty in the white robe should be his wife, Yun Yao." Helian Wuge pinched the thumb ring on his left hand and sneered, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's kill that kid and take his wife." Tuoba Da opened his wide mouth. He twisted his neck and moved his shoulders with a sinister smile. He took out 2 large millstone axes and rubbed his palms together in an eager manner. "Let's have a fair competition. Whoever kills Ji Tianxing will have his wife." Jiang Qi and Helian Wuge turned around and glared at him. They shouted, "Tuoba Da, you already have Xian. You have no part in this. Tuoba Da, get out of my way. You are eating from the bowl and still looking at the pot." Master Tong turned around and looked at them. He said sternly, "Yi Liushui warned us that the kid is very powerful. Don't let your guard down." Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and the other 2 all had disapproving expressions. "Fat. The whole continent is spreading the legend of Ji Tianxing. It's too exaggerated, who would believe it? The so-called rumors are all hearsay. Who knows how many times they have been exaggerated? How can you take it seriously? But I heard that his wife is as beautiful as a goddess. That's true. I don't believe that a kid in his 20s can be so powerful. As they spoke, the three of them flew down to the entrance of the cave. Chapter 23:13. Jiang Qi, Helian Wuzhua, and Tuoba Da swaggered outside the cave. Even though their target was Ji Tianxing. However, they ignored Ji Tianxing and stared at Yun Yao. Their eyes were filled with amazement and infatuation. After all, they spent most of their time at Mount Fengling and had not been to Shunwu continent for countless years. The only people they saw were from the three aristocratic families and their vassal forces. They were already sick of seeing them. Now that they saw a beauty like Yun Yao, they recalled the young and beautiful women on Mount Fengling and suddenly felt that they had been blind. Yun Yao was the bright moon in the sky and the bright stars in the sky. On the other hand, the women on Mount Fengling had become vulgar and rural women. They were simply unbearable to look at. The arrival of Jiang Qi and the other two naturally attracted everyone's attention. The warriors scattered in the canyon immediately became interested and looked at Jiang Qi and the other two expectantly. Everyone secretly prayed that Jiang Qi and the other two could defeat Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao and teach them a painful lesson. Yun Yao also gripped her silver moon swords tightly. Her aura became sharper and she shouted coldly, "If you don't want to die, stay outside the boundary obediently." Tuoba Da glanced at the gully below his feet and sneered, "Oh, this girl is quite domineering. However, I like ice beauties like you." Jiang Qi glanced at him and scolded, "Like my ass. She's the fairy I've set my eyes on. I'll fall out with anyone who tries to snatch her away." Helian Wuzhua took out a bronze cauldron and scolded with a black face, "You two idiots, why are you talking about such useless things? Let's complete the mission and get rid of that kid first." Jiang Qi had indeed restrained himself. He secretly accumulated magic power in his body and locked onto Ji Tianxing's aura with his spirit. Tuoba Da still had an arrogant attitude and sneered at Yun Yao, "Little beauty, we're here to find Ji Tianxing. This has nothing to do with you. Step aside obediently. After we kill Ji Tianxing, we'll have a good time with you." Before he could finish his words, Yun Yao's expression changed, and a cold killing intent flashed in her eyes. She instantly understood that these three people were not here for the illusory void mystic realm, but to assassinate Ji Tianxing. Thus, she unhesitatingly brandished her silver moon twin swords and used all of her power to pierce out a sky full of cold stars. Swish! Swish! Over 100 starry sword lights formed a marvelous sword formation and pressed down on Tuoba Da and the other two. Suddenly, the dazzling starlight illuminated the sky, so dazzling that people couldn't open their eyes. Tuoba Da hurriedly waved his huge axe and slashed out two huge white tiger phantoms towards Yun Yao. Helian Wuzhua cast a spell with both hands and controlled the bronze cauldron to release a raging fire that descended from the sky and enveloped Yun Yao. Jiang Qi also performed a sword technique with both hands, and the sword case on his back opened automatically. Two treasured swords, one green and one purple, flew out and attacked Yun Yao. Bam 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 bam! The sky was full of sword lights and saber shadows clashed, exploding a deafening sound that reverberated in the canyon. Thousands of light shards were enveloped by the terrifying shockwave and scattered in all directions, covering a radius of tens of miles. Those practitioners who were nearby all retreated far away, afraid that they would be affected by the shockwave. After a moment, when the colorful shockwave dissipated, the sky full of sand and dust settled down, and the scene regained its clarity. Jiang Qi, Helian Wuzhua, and Tuoba Da spread out in a semicircle, surrounding the entrance of the cave. The three of them were unscathed, and their bodies were filled with fighting spirit, accumulating destructive power. Yun Yao was still standing at the entrance of the cave. She wasn't injured, but her face was pale and she was pushed back a few steps. She frowned as she looked at Jiang Qi and the other two, thinking to herself, "These three young martial saints have reached the 7th degree realm, and they have cultivated ancient secret skills. They are hard to deal with." At this moment, Jiang Qi transmitted his voice to Helian Wuzhua and Tuoba Da. "Tuoba Da, you hold back Yun Yao, Helion and I will deal with Ji Tianxing. Let's end this quickly. Tuoba Da didn't think much and agreed without hesitation. Hihi, don't worry, I promise to hold back the little beauty and not let her run away. Jiang Qi and Helion Wuzhua looked at each other and sneered in their hearts. Tuoba Da is an idiot. After we kill Ji Tianxing, not only can we complete the mission and get the reward, we can also decide who Yun Yaro belongs to. But Tuoba Da doesn't understand. In the next moment, the three of them attacked again, unleashing their full power and displaying their marvelous secret skills. Dragon Elephant Heaven Suppressing Seal. Tuoba Da roared and waved his pair of millstone axes, slashing out a dark golden divine dragon and a golden divine elephant as big as a mountain towards Yun Yao. Jiang Qi controlled the purple and green dual swords, unleashing thousands of chilling rays that enveloped Ji Tianxing's body. Helion Wuzhua also cast a spell, controlling the medicine cauldron to release a sky-burning fire that poured down like a flood. An aura that could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth, as well as a violent and shocking power, immediately exploded outside the cave. The surrounding 100 miles were sealed by an invisible force. Even the air was compressed and disappeared. This area became a vacuum zone and was extremely dangerous. At this critical moment, Yun Yaro swung her dual swords with all her might, unleashing hundreds of starry giant swords that shot towards Tuoba Da like shooting stars. Boom! 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 The starry giant swords clashed with the dragon elephant shadow, creating an earth-shattering sound and exploding into billions of light shards. The incomparably violent impact caused the canyon to shake incessantly. The ground cracked open, and the mountain walls collapsed into countless pieces of rubble. Ji Tianxing also stopped breaking the array and turned around to face Jiang Qi and Helion Wuzhua. Heaven-splitting sword. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and slashed out a 1,000-feet-long golden sword. Bang! 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 Jiang Qi's boundless sword light and Helion Wuzhua's monstrous fire were both shattered into pieces by the giant sword and scattered everywhere. Ji Tianxing ignored the flames and spell shadows in the sky. He flew across the sky expressionlessly and arrived in front of Jiang Qi as fast as lightning. God-slaying sword. He roared and slashed down with the sword of burial of heaven. Jiang Qi's expression changed. He used all his strength to control the purple and green dual swords to block the attack. Catcher. However, with a thunderous sound, he was sent flying by the giant sword and crashed into the ruins 30 miles away. The purple and green dual swords were also exhausted and fell from the sky. Ji Tianxing teleported again and appeared behind Helion Wuzhua. He punched with his left hand. Star-shattering fist. The huge golden fist radiance sent the bronze cauldron flying and hit Helion Wuzhua's back. His body bent like a shrimp and blood spurted out from his nose and mouth. He drew an arc in the sky and fell into the ruins 20 miles away. On the other side, Yun Yaro was still defending against Tuoba Da's fierce attacks. Ji Tianxing dashed over again like a ghost and slashed out a 5-colored lightning with his sword, sending Tuoba Da flying. He crashed into the ruins with his body charred and smoking. In the blink of an eye, the 3 powerful young martial sages were beaten up by Ji Tianxing. They lay on the ground pathetically. Chapter 23:14. Are you even worthy? These short words were like sharp blades that pierced fiercely into the hearts of Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and the others. An unparalleled sense of humiliation surged from their hearts and filled their entire bodies. The 3 climbed out of the ruins and flew into the sky, surrounding Ji Tianxing in the middle. Tuoba Da wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and grinned. Ji Tianxing, it seems that the rumors are true. You do have some skills. Tuoba Da, don't kill nameless people. This is perfect. You have the right to die under my myriad beasts' war axe. Helion Wuzhua held the bronze cauldron in his right hand and said gloomily, it's just a difference of 1 move. It's no big deal. We underestimated you just now, but you won't be so lucky next time. Jiang Qi tidied up his messy hair and collar. He held the purple-green twin swords with both hands and stared at Ji Tianxing with a sharp gaze. Rumor has it that your swordsmanship is unparalleled. Unfortunately, I was born into a swordsmanship family and have mastered a sword technique that has been passed down for tens of thousands of years. Today, I'll show you what it means to be the ancestor of swordsmanship. Although the three of them had been injured by Ji Tianxing and were in a sorry state, they were not discouraged. Instead, their fighting spirit was even higher. At this time, Yun Yarrow flew to Ji Tianxing's side and stood side by side with him. She stared coldly at Jiang Qi and the other two. She secretly transmitted her voice to Ji Tianxing. Based on their tone and their attire, they shouldn't be from the Shunwu continent. They should be from a hidden family overseas. They don't seem to be here for the illusory void secret realm. Their goal is to assassinate you. Ji Tianxing nodded and sneered. I can see that too. I just don't know who ordered them to do this, or if they have a grudge against me in the past. He had already begun to suspect that the illusory void secret realm was a conspiracy. Perhaps someone was using this information to lure him to the ruins of God and kill him here. Of course, he could not rule out the possibility that it was a power or family that he had offended in the past that was seeking revenge. At this moment, two figures flew out from the clouds and landed beside Jiang Qi. The newcomers were a hunchbacked old man and an enchanting woman. They were Master Tong and Tantaizian Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow's gazes immediately fell on the two of them. When he saw Tantaizian Ji Tianxing frowned fiercely, and a wisp of surprise flashed through his eyes. He had never thought that Tantaizian would appear here and mix with this group of people. When he looked at Tantaizian was also staring at him. Her face was expressionless and her eyes were as cold as ice. Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a sneer as he said in a mocking tone, Tantaizian I thought you would turn over a new leaf after that incident. I didn't expect you to find a new backer. Tantaizian's body trembled slightly as a wisp of sorrow flashed through her heart. However, her expression did not change as she said in an indifferent tone, What does my choice have to do with you? Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and sneered, Very good. You should be clear about the consequences of being my enemy. Tantaizian pursed her lips tightly and did not answer. Tuoba Da hurriedly flew to Tantaizian's side, held her wrist nervously and asked, Xian do you know Ji Tianxing? Tantaizian said expressionlessly, Ji Tianxing is famous all over the world. Who doesn't know him? Such an ambiguous answer made Tuoba Da frown fiercely and feel a little confused. On the other side, Yun Yarrow just took a deep look at Tantaizian and then withdrew her gaze. She did not ask Ji Tianxing. Because she was the one who knew Ji Tianxing the best. She could guess without asking that Ji Tianxing and Tantaizian must know each other. However, it was impossible for there to be any feelings or ambiguity between them. Even if Ji Tianxing was blind, it was impossible. At this time, the hunchbacked old man, Master Tong, walked towards Ji Tianxing and said in a low voice, Everyone says that Ji Tianxing is the reincarnation of Kenshin and can be called the #1 genius in the world. However, I have never believed in rumors. Today, I want to try and see if I can crush a legend with my own hand. As he spoke, Master Tong's entire body burst forth with soaring battle intent, emitting an incomparably domineering aura. At this moment, he was no longer a hunchbacked old man. He was like a lofty mountain that people could only look up to. Sky-opening palm. Master Tong suddenly shouted coldly and raised his left hand with an imposing aura. He struck out a 5-colored torrent and blasted it towards Ji Tianxing. The 5-colored torrent condensed into a giant palm as big as a mountain. It was like a giant axe that could split heaven and earth. It struck down with terrifying power. At that moment, the heaven and earth within a radius of 300 miles were sealed and solidified like ice. The 5-colored giant axe seemed to have absorbed the power of heaven and earth within 1,000 miles and was determined to crush Ji Tianxing into pieces. Such a terrifying attack had already reached the peak of the martial sage realm. It was just short of a transformation of power and it was the means of a martial god. Ji Tianxing instantly understood that the hunchbacked old man was a 9th-degree martial sage realm peak, a half-step to martial god. Celestial dragon overlord body. His body surged with golden light and expanded vigorously. He instantly became a 10 feet tall golden-armored giant. It was as if the god of war had descended to the world. His combat power had also increased by 5 times and he had reached the peak of the martial sage realm. He was no weaker than Master Tong. Sky-breaking finger. Ji Tianxing shouted and raised his left hand. His index and middle fingers were like a sword and pierced towards the sky. A huge golden finger shadow appeared, and it was like a giant sword that could support the heavens and earth. It pierced towards the five-colored giant palm fiercely. In the next moment, the two collided fiercely and an earth-shattering sound exploded. Kaboom! Amidst the thunderous sound, the golden finger shadow and the five-colored giant palm collapsed at the same time and shattered into light fragments that covered the sky and earth. A violent burst of energy swept out in all directions. Ji Tianxing and Master Tong did not move at all and were not affected by the shockwave at all. Jiang Qi and Tuoba Da's expressions changed as they hurriedly released their protective dharmic powers to protect themselves. Rumble. The shockwave wreaked havoc in the canyon and affected a few hundred miles. It shook the ground and the mountains, giving off a loud, dull sound. The few groups of martial practitioners who were closer to the battle were all shaken to the point of staggering, their faces pale. The martial sages could still dissolve the power of the shockwave, but the few martial monarchs were unlucky. They were all sent flying and bleeding from their 7 orifices. After the shockwave dissipated, the crowd regained their composure. They were extremely shocked and terrified. "Oh my God! That old man looks ordinary, but he is so powerful. A half-step to martial God Realm Master? There are less than 3 in the entire continent. Who is that old man? Ji Tianxing is so powerful. I thought the hunchbacked old man could defeat him, but I didn't expect them to be tied." Chapter 23:15. While everyone was still in a daze, Ji Tianxing and Master Tong fought again. Ji Tianxing waved the Heavenpiercer sword and slashed out a huge starry sword that covered the sky and earth. It crisscrossed and attacked Lord Tong. Master Tong swung his walking stick horizontally and unleashed 3 blue light waves that were 1,000 feet tall. They swept out like huge waves. Bang, bang, bang. The starry sword clashed with the blue light waves and created 3 earth-shattering sounds. The berserk energy exploded, shaking the tall mountains on both sides of the canyon. Cracks appeared on them, and countless rocks collapsed. Ji Tianxing didn't move at all, but Master Tong was pushed back 10 steps. His wrinkled face flushed red. Before he could suppress the Dharma power in his body, Ji Tianxing pressed forward and slashed down with the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Heavenly Dragon Slash. Ji Tianxing roared furiously as he swung his sword and slashed out a huge sword that was 3,000 meters long. Master Tong was trying to suppress the Dharma power in his body. Seeing the giant golden sword slashing towards him, he quickly waved his walking stick to block it. Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and Helian Wuzhua didn't stay idle either. They quickly used their secret techniques to help Master Tong fight against Ji Tianxing. The 3 of them were arrogant and didn't like each other. They were always bickering and didn't like each other. But at this critical moment, the 3 of them abandoned all other thoughts and attacked Ji Tianxing with all their might. Yun Yarrow also brandished her silver moon dual swords. Cold stars filled the sky as she blocked the attacks of the 3 young martial saints. The 2 sides fought fiercely in the canyon and used their secret techniques. Light flashed everywhere and loud sounds shook the sky. Boom! Bang! 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 Suddenly, the canyon was in chaos and the sky was filled with colorful lights. The violent and raging energy fiercely impacted the canyon and the mountain ranges on both sides, sending countless rocks and dirt flying, splashing up dust that covered the sky and covered the sun. The 6 groups of martial artists nearby quickly retreated away from the center of the battlefield to avoid being injured by the aftershocks. The battle between the martial sacred realm experts lasted for 15 minutes. After exchanging a few hundred blows, the outcome of the battle was gradually decided. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow's hair was messy, and their white clothes were stained with blood. Their faces were pale, and their magic power was greatly exhausted. However, the situation of Master Tong, Jiang Qi, and the other 3 was even more miserable. Master Tong's hair was disheveled, and his grey linen clothes had been torn into rags. There were several hideous wounds on his chest and back. Jiang Qi's sword box dimmed and the azulette swords trembled as their light flickered. He was covered in blood. His face was covered in blood, and there was a bowl-sized hole in his chest. One could vaguely see his dark red heart. One of Tuoba Da's legs had been cut off, and there was a foot-long wound on his waist that almost cut him in half. Helian Wujwa was also covered in sword wounds, a total of 18 wounds so deep that his bones could be seen. There was a hideous wound on the right side of his face, and blood kept gushing out. Half of his face was about to fall off. However, he was proficient in artifact refining and alchemy, so he had already taken some healing pills to suppress his injuries. The two sides were still fighting. Suddenly, Ji Tianxing seized the opportunity to find Master Tong's weakness and used his trump card without hesitation. God-killing spear. He raised his left hand, and golden flames surged out of his palm, forming a golden spear that was more than 10 feet long. He thrust it toward Master Tong. Swish! The spear turned into a golden light and shot across the sky, arriving in front of Master Tong. Master Tong's expression changed drastically. His eyes widened in shock, and his eyes were filled with fear. He wanted to teleport away, but it was too late. He tried to block the attack with his black walking stick, but it was useless. Boom! Amidst a thunderous boom, the god-slaying spear pierced through his chest. His thin and weak body suddenly exploded, turning into thousands of pieces that flew in all directions. A faint golden god soul flew into the distance amidst the pieces of flesh and blood that filled the sky. Ji Tianxing had destroyed the body of Master Tong, who was at the half-step to martial god realm. Such a terrifying scene immediately filled all the spectating cultivators with fear, cold sweat dripping down their backs. Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and Helian Wujwa were terrified. Their eyes were wide open, and the battle intent in their hearts dissipated. They knew that they were no match for Ji Tianxing. With Master Tong, an expert, present, they had their backbone and they had dared to think about how to kill Ji Tianxing. However, Master Tong had been defeated and his body had been destroyed by Ji Tianxing. Their confidence was destroyed, and they turned around to escape without hesitation. Swish! 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 The three of them flew as fast as they could. They followed Master Tong's divine soul and flew toward the end of the valley. They were different from ordinary martial sages, and they did not want to say anything to regain their dignity. Because they knew very well that they would only be asking for humiliation, and it was meaningless. Since they had been defeated, it was more important to escape. Tan Taizian who had been watching the battle in the sky, stared at Ji Tianxing in disbelief. She was the most shocked and in disbelief. She knew that Ji Tianxing was not as powerful as he was now at the northern battlefield of the Luoshui Holy Kingdom. In comparison, Ji Tianxing was 20 times more powerful than he had been at that time. She could not imagine what Ji Tianxing had gone through. How could his strength have increased 20 times in a year? However, she quickly came to her senses. She took a deep look at Ji Tianxing, and then she turned around to escape in a hurry. She followed Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and the others and flew toward the north. After a few breaths, Tan Taizian Jiang Qi, and the others disappeared into the horizon. The deep and dark valley gradually became peaceful again. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow stood outside the cave. They put away their swords and took a few elixirs. Within 100 miles, the several groups of dumbfounded martial artists gradually came to their senses. Everyone broke out in a cold sweat, and their hearts were filled with fear and awe. After witnessing Master Tong's body being destroyed, they finally realized that Ji Tianxing's strength was infinitely close to the divine realm. It was extremely terrifying. They did not dare to have any more fantasies. They all quietly retreated dozens of miles, for fear that Ji Tianxing would vent his anger on them. At this moment, Yun Yarrow turned her head to look at Ji Tianxing beside her and asked, "We fought just now. Those 3 young martial saints are all descendants of ancient aristocratic families. One is proficient in the sword principle, one is proficient in refining Dharma treasures, and the last one has combined the soul of 10,000 beasts with martial arts. Can you tell if they're assassins under someone's orders or if they're your enemies from back then?" Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a moment. Then he nodded and said, "If I am not wrong, they should be the disciples of the 3 big hidden sects. They are the 3 big families that have existed for tens of thousands of years. They used to live in seclusion in the Star Moon Cave and were quite mysterious." Chapter 23:16. I see. Yun Yarrow nodded and asked, It seems like this is a conspiracy and it has something to do with martial god Tianju. However, I don't understand. The three aristocratic families and martial god Tianju are enemies. Why would they want to assassinate you? As the old saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Shouldn't they join hands with you to deal with martial god Tianju? Ji Tianxing shook his head and smiled. That makes sense, but it's not absolute. If martial god Tianju has some deal with the three aristocratic families and both sides have reached some kind of cooperation, then it's not surprising that they want to assassinate me. Yun Yarrow understood his meaning and didn't ask anymore. Ji Tianxing glanced at her and teased with a smile, "That's all you have to ask? You don't have anything else to ask?" "What else?" Yun Yarrow asked in confusion. Ji Tianxing said with a playful smile, "Under normal circumstances, you should ask me who that woman is and how we know each other. What's our relationship?" Yun Yarrow rolled her eyes at him and pretended to be angry. "Do you think I'm that kind of secular woman who is jealous of a man? I know and trust your character and conduct the best. Although that woman is beautiful, she's too seductive and flirtatious. Judging from her demeanor and temperament, she was most likely a woman who had many subordinates under her skirt. You don't even have the interest to look at such an impure woman. How could you have anything to do with her?" Ji Tianxing looked at her gently and held her hands. He said with a sincere tone, "As expected, the person who understands me the best is you. There are many things that I don't need to say and you can understand." Yun Yarrow nodded and said with emotion, "Aku and you have 2 lives of love. She has never regretted it and even died for you once. However, you married me. You didn't want me to be sad, so you kept rejecting her and would rather hurt her. If I didn't play the matchmaker and resolve the knot in your heart, I don't know how much you would hurt her. Even a woman like Aku, who is loyal to you, you kept rejecting her. How could those common women of the pugilistic world enter your eyes? I'm even sure that other than me and Aku, you'll never fall in love with a third woman in your life." Ji Tianxing thought about it seriously and nodded in agreement. "Yes, you're right." Yun Yarrow rolled her eyes at him and said with a smile, "All right, let's hurry up and break the formation. The commotion caused by the battle just now was too great. It would definitely attract many martial sages over. I'm afraid this place will soon become lively, and when that happens, there will be more dangers." Ji Tianxing nodded and didn't say anything else, continuing to crack the array formation. Yun Yarrow held the silver moon twin swords and stood by his side to protect him. She vigilantly monitored the surroundings. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. Ji Tianxing broke the 3rd multicolored light barrier and activated the 4th seal. Meanwhile, deep in the mountains 30,000 kilometers away from the Grand Canyon, in the belly of a 3,000-meter tall mountain, Jiangqi, Tuoba Da, and Tantaizian were hiding in a dark and gloomy cave. Other than Tantaizian, the 3 of them were covered in blood. They were badly injured and their combat abilities were severely reduced. The most miserable one was Master Tong, whose physical body had been destroyed. He was only left with a ball of divine soul, which floated in the dark cave, flashing and dimming. Jiangqi's face was full of hatred. He clenched his fist and hit the rock in front of him. He cursed in a hoarse voice, "Damn bastard. He's so young. How could he have such terrifying strength?" Helian Wuzhua healed his injuries and nodded. Even if he started cultivating when he was in his mother's womb, he has only cultivated for 20 years. How could he reach the half-step to divine realm? In the past 10,000 years, there is definitely no one else like him who reached the peak of the martial sage realm in 20 years. He's not human. He's definitely a god. Master Tong's voice came out from the flickering divine soul. He's the reincarnation of a god. How can we judge him with common sense? We underestimated him and didn't believe the legends on the continent. Now, it seems that he's even more powerful than the legends. Master Tong's voice was low and hoarse, full of fatigue and regret. He was already very old and had no hope of reaching the martial god realm. Now, his physical body was destroyed. Even if he spent 100 years to rebuild his physical body, it would not be as good as before. Tuoba Da did not interrupt. He frowned and pondered. After a while, He turned to look at Tantai Xian and asked in a low voice, Xian, you knew Ji Tianxing long ago and knew how powerful he was. Why didn't you tell us earlier? Tantai Xian sneered and said calmly, you must have forgotten that I've reminded you 4 times that Ji Tianxing is not an ordinary martial sage. You must be careful. However, you were too arrogant and completely ignored my words. Now that you've lost, you're blaming me? Seeing that she was angry, Tuoba Da quickly explained, Xian, don't misunderstand. I'm not blaming you. I just think, you should have told us earlier that you knew him. Sigh. He wanted to explain but found that he could not. No matter what, he was blaming Tantai Xian. Tantai Xian did not hide her disdain. She sneered and said, what you need to do now is not to feel sorry and regret. If you can't kill Ji Tianxing, you can't take back Xingyue Wonderland. You're all seriously injured and can't recover in a short time. The only way now is to contact Yi Liushui and act with them. That's the only way. Jiangqi frowned and said reluctantly, we're in such a mess now. Why should we go to Yi Liushui? Let him see us as a joke and mock us wantonly. Helian Wuzhua also shook his head and said, let's heal for a few days first. We'll talk about it after we've recovered. Only Master Tong said earnestly, Miss Xian is right. What we need to do now is to meet Yi Liushui. Ji Tianxing is very powerful and has extraordinary means. I'm afraid he'll break the seal of the secret land soon. If we heal for a few days, he'll have entered the secret land by then. Jiangqi and Tuoba Da still wanted to refute, but Master Tong ordered in a dignified tone, you don't have to say more. Follow my orders. Tonight, you'll heal your wounds and try to cover them. Tomorrow morning, you'll meet Yi Liushui and follow his orders. Of course, when I'm not with you, you'd better be smart and be careful. Hearing this, Jiangqi and Tuoba Da frowned and asked at the same time, Master Tong, you're not going with us? Chapter 23:17. 4 hours passed. It was midnight. Heaven and earth were as dark as ink, and the canyon was dead silent. Ji Tianxing finally cracked the 5th seal. As the blue defensive light shield dissipated, the seal at the entrance of the cave was completely removed. Ji Tianxing stopped and exhaled a long breath of turbid air. He had taken the first step to success and was very close to the illusory void secret realm. Let's go in. He led Yun Yarrow into the cave and walked along the dark tunnel. The cave was slanted downwards and extended deep into the ground. About 10,000 feet deep, there was a huge 5-colored light screen that sealed the entire cave. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow could both sense that the colorful light screen was emitting a powerful divine power. Without a doubt, that was the real seal of the illusory void secret realm. It was a genuine god-level array. The two of them crossed the 10,000 feet long tunnel and came under the 5-colored light screen. Ji Tianxing stared at the 5-colored light screen and used the God's Eye mystic technique to observe it carefully. Yun Yarrow took out a light red elixir from her spatial ring and handed it to Ji Tianxing. Tianxing, you've been deciphering the array formation all this time, and you've even fought a few battles. Not only did you use up a lot of magic power, but your soul is also very tired. Take this elixir first to recover your soul and magic power. Then, you can study the seal of the secret realm. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment, then took the pill and swallowed it. This was because his divine sense had detected that there were a few more groups of martial artists in the canyon. In the past 4 hours, another 5 groups of martial artists had arrived and were hiding around the entrance of the cave. He had to maintain an abundant amount of magic power and a clear and powerful soul to be able to guard against any possible danger. After taking the elixir, he sat cross-legged on a rock and regulated his breathing for 2 hours. The elixir's effect was immediate. It restored his magic power to its peak, and his mental state was more energetic. He then stood up and looked at the 5-colored light screen, carefully observing and studying it. At the same time, more than a dozen groups of warriors in the canyon were whispering to each other. The next few waves of experts were basically martial sages from the 3 divine kingdoms. They considered themselves to be of high status and powerful, so they wanted to fly to the cave entrance. However, they had only flown a short distance when they were stopped by other martial saints. Brother, please don't be impulsive. The entrance to the secret realm has already been occupied. Who? Who is so reckless as to occupy the entrance to the secret realm? It's Ji Tianxing. Oh, so it's him. Damn it, why is he here? With his status and means, I don't think Martial God Nangong's cave abode is good enough for him. You don't know this, but there were a few groups of martial saints who clashed with Ji Tianxing. All of them were severely injured by him and fled in a sorry state. Among them was a half-step martial god with a hunchback whose body had been destroyed by Ji Tianxing. Moreover, Ji Tianxing is arrogant, despotic, and ruthless. If you go up against him now, you're just looking for death. Thank you for your reminder, brother. If other martial saints had occupied the entrance, we would still stand a chance. Since Ji Tianxing is here, we can only retreat. Don't provoke that murderous god. Don't, brother, don't be discouraged. Even if we can't defeat Ji Tianxing, we won't fight him head-on. We can wait here. Maybe there's still a chance. You're right. Let's wait and see. Similar conversations continued to take place in the canyon. When the new martial saints heard that Ji Tianxing had occupied the entrance to the secret realm, they did not dare to say anything. Some even wanted to retreat. However, after being persuaded and instigated by others, they all decided to stay. No one was willing to give up on Martial God Nangong's cave abode. They were still hoping that a miracle would happen. Unknowingly, a night had passed. In the canyon outside the cave, a total of 18 groups of martial artists had gathered. There were more than 20 martial saints and more than 10 martial lord. Inside the cave, Ji Tianxing was still standing under the colorful light screen. He stared at the light screen, observing and deducing the formation. He was so immersed in it that he almost forgot about the passage of time. In the morning, the sun rose from the east. White mist lingered between the mountains. Under the golden sunlight, it shone like a fairyland. Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and Tantai Xiana came out of the cave and flew up into the sky. After a night of rest and treatment, their injuries had stabilized. They still had 70% of their strength. Especially their external injuries, they were much better after treatment. The three of them tidied up their clothes and hair. They looked more normal than last night. Master Tong had left last night. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, Master Tong returned to the North Sea in a low-key manner. Only Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and the other two stayed to carry out the mission. After yesterday's setback, they were not confident. They had lost their drive and fighting spirit. Where are we going to find Yi Liushui? Helian Wuzhua looked at the rising sun with a gloomy face. What's there to find? Tuoba Da muttered in annoyance. Just send him a message and arrange a place to meet him. Jiang Qi nodded in agreement. He took out a jade slip and sent a message to Yi Liushui. After waiting patiently for 15 minutes, they received Yi Liushui's reply. A beam of light flew from the sky and landed in front of Jiang Qi. He quickly picked up the jade slip and read the message with his divine sense. After reading it, his expression changed slightly. He frowned unhappily. Helian Wuzhua and Tuoba Da looked at him and asked, Jiang Qi, what did Yi Liushui say? Where did he say we should meet? Is there a problem? Jiang Qi put away the jade slip and said expressionlessly, Yi Liushui said he has more important things to do and won't meet us. But he asked us to wait near the entrance and work with the first deity Yuan Zhen. Tuoba Da and Helian Wuzhua frowned and muttered with displeasure. First deity Yuan Zhen? Is he the eldest son of martial god Tianju? I heard he's a despicable person with a bad reputation. I think he was taught a lesson by Ji Tianxing. How strong is that guy? Do you have any intelligence or wisdom? Does he know how to plan? Don't tell me he's an ignorant and incompetent second generation. If he dares to act all high and mighty, I'll definitely beat him up. Jiang Qi sighed and said, this mission is a deal between the three aristocratic families and Tianju divine nation. It's not something you and I can control. At this point, we can only follow orders. Who dares to disobey? Even if Yuan Zhen is a good-for-nothing, we have to follow him and protect him. Yi Liushui said that since we failed, we'll be responsible for protecting Yuan Zhen. As long as Ji Tianxing dies, We'll have completed the mission and Xingyue Cave will be returned to us. Chapter 23:18. Thousands of miles away from the canyon, there was a lonely peak that was thousands of feet tall. Jiang Qi, Helian Wuzhua, and Tuoba Da were standing under a towering ancient tree, waiting quietly. The sun rose to the middle of the sky. The sunlight shone through the dense leaves and fell on their faces. They were clearly impatient. About a quarter of an hour later, a few streaks of multicolored light flew over from afar. Swoosh, swoosh. The flowing lights landed on the peak a few hundred feet away from them. Jiang Qi and the others looked over and saw 4 well-dressed young men and women with extraordinary auras. The leader was a young man with a tall stature. He wore a golden robe and a crown on his head. His pale face carried a hint of arrogance. Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and the others immediately guessed that the man in the golden robe was Yuan Zhan, the first divine prince of Heaven End Holy Nation. Following behind Yuan Zhan was a young man in a green robe with a sword on his back. Jiang Qi, who practiced swordsmanship, always paid more attention to martial artists who practiced swordsmanship. He looked at the man a few more times. The other 2 were young and beautiful women. One wore a pink dress and looked charming. The other wore a yellow dress and looked dignified and beautiful. There were 4 people on each side and they were all young martial saints. Naturally, both sides stared at each other silently, sizing each other up from head to toe. Seeing that Yuan Zhan and the others did not intend to speak, Jiang Qi and Tuoba Da looked at each other. Then, Jiang Qi led the others to greet them. He stopped in front of Yuan Zhan and the others and smiled. "I am Jiang Qi, the young master of the Jiang family. Greetings to the first divine prince. I am Tuoba Da, the young master of the Tuoba family. Greetings to the first divine prince. I am Helian Wuzhua." Other than Tantai Xian, the other 3 all said their names. But Yuan Zhan's reaction was very calm. He only nodded slightly and looked at Tantai Xian. Even though he had seen many beautiful women, he still could not hide his surprise when he saw Tantai Xian for the first time. He looked at Tantai Xian for a long time. Chao Ying's eyes dimmed when she saw this. Seeing Yuan Zhan's reaction, Tuoba Da felt even more disgusted with him. He even felt a trace of enmity. Mother ***, I've already guessed it. What bullsh ***T great divine son? He's definitely just an embroidered pillow. I didn't think that not only is he arrogant and cold, he even dares to stare at Xian. This brat definitely has designs on Xian. I have to guard against him. Thinking of this, Tuoba Da reached out his arm and held Tantai Xian's waist. He had a smile on his face as he spoke to Yuan Zhan. "Your Highness, I'm really sorry, I forgot to introduce earlier. This is my wife, Lin Xian. Yuan Zhan was astute, so how could he not see through Tuoba Da's intentions? Immediately, a playful smile appeared on his face, and a trace of disdain flashed through his eyes. He withdrew his gaze from Tantai Xian, pointed to the 3 young men and women behind him, and introduced them to Jiang Qi and others. "Since we are going to work together, I will introduce them to you. This was Martial Saint Qingshan, the youngest Saint Emperor of the Heaven End Divine Nation. Is this Chen? Martial Saint, this is Martial Saint Chao Ying. It will be more convenient for us to act after we get to know each other." Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and the other 2 clasped their hands and bowed to Martial Saint Qingshan and others. Everyone greeted each other and exchanged some pleasantries. After everyone had quietened down, Yuan Zhan then said in a serious tone, "I won't waste any more words. Everyone just needs to understand that we only have one goal in this operation, and that is to kill Ji Tianqing, at all costs and by all means." After saying that, Yuan Zhan glanced at Jiang Qi and others, and said in a cold tone, "Before the operation, Commander Yi told me that if we invited the experts of the 3 aristocratic families, there would be no mistakes. However, I didn't expect the 3 aristocratic families to be so perfunctory and send a few young martial saints. Moreover, you have already acted on your own and confronted Ji Tianqing head-on, and lost to him." Hearing this, Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and the other 2's expressions changed. A strong sense of humiliation surged from their chests, and there was a hint of anger on their faces. "Qingshan and Chen? The martial saints and the others looked at them with half-smiles, and there was a hint of mockery at the corners of their mouths. The atmosphere suddenly became awkward. Helion Wuzhua was more tactful, and he nodded with a smile. "You are right, Sir Divine Child. We have indeed underestimated the enemy in this operation. We have lived overseas for a long time, and we do not understand the situation in Shunwu continent. We also did not expect Ji Tianxing to be so monstrous, which is why we have suffered such a great loss. However, since Commander Yi has come to us, he must have known that he is no match for Ji Tianxing. That is why he needs us to work together to complete the mission." What he meant was that they could not defeat Ji Tianxing because they did not understand the situation and had underestimated the enemy. However, Yi Liushui and his group could not defeat Ji Tianxing either. Otherwise, why would he ask them for help? In any case, none of them could defeat Ji Tianxing, so why should they laugh at each other? It would be better for everyone to work together to deal with Ji Tianxing. Completing the mission was the most important thing. Yuan Zhan, Qingshan Martial Saint, and the others understood the meaning behind Helion Wuzhua's words and could not help but look at him deeply. Yuan Zhan continued, "Helion Wuzhua is right. I hope that all of you will remember that Ji Tianxing is not an ordinary martial saint. He is second only to the martial gods. Perhaps you have been trapped in the North Sea for a long time and have become frogs in a well. Now that you have suffered a loss, you should learn a lesson. From now on, you must not underestimate the enemy and listen to my orders. Otherwise, I can only ask you to leave, and there is no need to mention the Zingluna cave again." Everyone finally understood that these words were the main point. Yuan Zhan's previous words were just a prelude. This was his true motive. Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and Helion Wuzhua all frowned, and anger flashed in their eyes. However, the three quickly suppressed their anger and humiliation and remained calm and rational. There was nothing they could do. They had already failed once and had no right to bargain with Yuan Zhan. Seeing that the three of them remained silent, Yuan Zhan let out a satisfied smile and waved his hand. "If there are no objections, we will depart now." After saying that, he took the lead and flew into the sky, leading everyone towards the canyon. A distance of 10,000 miles was not far for them. A short half an hour later, the group arrived at the Grand Canyon. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. The group passed through the white clouds and stopped in the sky outside the cave, observing the surroundings from above. Within 100 miles of the cave, there were more than 10 groups of martial artists hiding. Most of them were martial saints. Inside the cave, there were flashes of colorful lights and violent waves of dharmic power. Yuan Zhan, Jiang Qi, and the others looked and saw Yun Yarrow standing in the cave, holding two swords in a defensive posture. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, was casting spells to break the seal with all his might. Chapter 23:19. Yuan Zhan frowned when he saw what was happening in the cave. Damn bastard! How dare he break the 5 seals at the entrance of the cave? How dare he try to break the divine seals in the illusory void mystery land? As he cursed in a low voice, a cold glint flashed in his eyes. His killing intent was obvious. Jiang Qi wanted to suggest that they attack when Ji Tianxing was breaking the seals. However, he recalled what Yuan Zhan had said before and decided to keep quiet. Martial Saint Qing Shan thought for a while and said to Yuan Zhan, "Your Highness, look at the dozens of people hiding in the valley. They are all intimidated by Ji Tianxing. No one dares to attack. Now that Ji Tianxing is trying his best to break the seals, it is the best time for us to attack him." Martial Saint Chen Yu nodded in agreement. "That's right, Your Highness. This is the best opportunity. Moreover, once we attack Ji Tianxing, the martial saints hiding in the surroundings will take the opportunity to attack him. Even if Ji Tianxing has 3 heads and 6 arms, he will not be able to fend off the attacks of so many martial saint." Yuan Zhan frowned. After thinking for a while, he shook his head. "This plan will not work. Firstly, we don't have enough people. We must wait for Lord Yi to come and join forces. Secondly, Ji Tianxing has just started to break the seals. He has not consumed much dharmic power and is still very powerful. When he breaks the seals and uses up all his dharmic power, he will be at his weakest. That will be the best time for us to attack him. At that time, He will be a fish on the chopping board. We can do whatever we want to him, so we have to wait patiently. After he finished speaking, Yuanzhen revealed a confident smile. Marshal Saint Qingshan and Marshal Saint Chen Yu both nodded with admiration. So, Your Highness has a plan. No wonder you are so confident. Is it because of our negligence? Your Highness is so thoughtful and has a flawless plan. Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and the others rolled their eyes in secret when they saw this scene, and they muttered in their hearts. What kind of *T plan is this? You call this a flawless plan? These two flatterers are so shameless to please Yuanzhen. Yuanzhen is indeed an idiot, surrounded by a bunch of sycophants and flatterers. Only Marshal Saint Chaoying did not express her opinion. She seemed to be deep in thought. After pondering for a moment, she asked Yuanzhen, Your Highness, the seal of the illusory void secret realm is a divine grade formation. Can Ji Tianxing break it? Yuanzhen sneered, with his martial sage realm strength, he shouldn't be able to break the deity grade seal. But don't forget his true identity. So, even if he breaks the seal, you don't have to be too surprised. Regardless of whether or not he can break the seal, he will exhaust all of his magic power and become weak. That will be the time of his death. Chao Ying nodded and said nothing more. Marshal Saint Qingshan said to everyone, Then let's follow the First Highness' wishes and wait patiently for an opportunity. Everyone, keep quiet. Don't make any noise and wake up Ji Tianxing. Of course, Chao Ying and Chen Yu would listen to him. Jiang Qi and the other two couldn't be bothered to meddle in other people's business, so they all maintained their silence. As for Tantaizian, she had the attitude of an outsider from beginning to end and had no intention of interfering. Ji Tianxing had been casting spells for 18 hours without any rest. Although he looked normal, his forehead was covered in sweat and he had used up 30% of his magic power. He was mentally exhausted and his progress in breaking the seal had reached a temporary impasse. After a few failed attempts, he had no choice but to stop casting spells temporarily. He stopped casting spells and stared at the 5-colored light screen. He frowned and fell into deep thought. At this moment, Yun Yarrow, who was not far away, looked at him with concern. She sent a voice transmission, Tianxing, don't be so anxious. Take a rest first. There are more than 100 martial artists outside. We have to be extra careful. Ji Tianxing nodded. He turned around and sat down beside her. He took an elixir to recover his magic power. As he refined the elixir, he said to Yun Yarrow, Equipment forging and formation Dao complement each other. Martial God Nangong is proficient in forging divine artifacts and his attainments in formation Dao are profound. The illusory sky secret realm is his cave residence. The divine formation that seals the secret realm was set up by him with all his knowledge. Even if I am proficient in thousands of divine formations and can deduce the way to break this formation, it will still take me 4 to 5 days to open it. Yun Yarrow nodded to show that she understood. She asked with concern, What if I help you and we work together to break it? How many days will it take? Ji Tianxing thought for a while and answered, About 3 days. Yun Yarrow turned her head and looked at the sky outside the cave. She said with a worried expression, If we work together to break the formation, we will give those people a chance. Unless we chase those martial artists away, we won't have a chance. Ji Tianxing also understood this point. He looked outside the cave with a serious expression. He released his divine sense and extended it out of the cave to check the situation around him. He wanted to see how many martial artists were hiding in the valley and how many martial saints were among them. The invisible divine sense spread out in the valley and soon covered a radius of 200 miles. Ji Tianxing immediately found that there were 19 groups of martial artists around him. There were more than 70 martial saints. Among them, a group of people immediately attracted his attention. There were 8 people in that group and they were all martial saints. When he used his divine sense to see the appearance of the 8 martial saints, he was stunned. Yuanzhen, martial saints Qingshan and Chen Yu, and Tantaizian and the 3 disciples of the aristocratic families. Ji Tianxing murmured in a low voice. He immediately revealed a mocking smile. Ha ha, The people of the three aristocratic families are indeed manipulated by the heaven extinction divine nation. They are actually with Yuan Zhen. 8 martial saints gathered together. Are they trying to sneak up on me while I am breaking the seal? As he spoke, he stood up and walked out of the cave. Yun Yarrow quickly followed him and asked with concern, Tianxing, there are many martial artists in the valley now. Are you really going to attack in public? Of course. Ji Tianxing said without hesitation, isn't this a good way to make an example of them and scare off the flies in the surroundings? After he spoke, he turned into a beam of golden light and flew out of the cave. He rushed into the sky as fast as lightning. Whoosh! With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianxing entered the clouds and appeared before Yuan Zhen and the others. Yuan Zhen, Jiang Qi, and the others were waiting patiently, looking bored. No one expected that Ji Tianxing, who was breaking the seal in the cave, would suddenly appear before them. When everyone recovered their wits, they were startled. They all showed vigilant and guarded expressions and subconsciously took a few steps back. Ji Tianxing looked at Yuan Zhen with a mocking expression and said with a cold smile, Yuan Zhen, you are already notorious. Your name has spread throughout the continent. You still have the face to come out. Chapter 2320. Hearing Yuan Zhen's words, Ji Tianxing's sneer deepened. What's the big deal with being humiliated? Since you don't know what's good for you and still dare to seek revenge from me, I'll give you another word. What word? Yuan Zhen asked subconsciously. Die. Ji Tianxing shouted coldly. A black light flashed in his right hand, and the sword of burial of heaven appeared. In the next moment, he waved the sword of burial of heaven without any explanation, stabbing a cold light that filled the sky towards Yuan Zhen. Yuan Zhen had already overestimated Ji Tianxing. However, he had not expected that Ji Tianxing would be so unbridled even with 7 martial sages behind him, killing him at the slightest disagreement. He was simply too arrogant and condescending. Yuan Zhen's anger and killing intent surged to the heavens. Without hesitation, he drew his sword and waved it to block. Clang, clang, clang. The sword lights that filled the sky collided. The 2 swords clashed, and a clear and crisp sound of collision burst forth. An incomparably violent force attacked, shaking Yuan Zhen and sending him flying backward on the spot. His complexion was as pale as paper. At the same time, the 3 martial saints, Qing Shan, Chen Yu, and Chao Ying, all let out angry roars, brandishing their swords and sabers as they charged towards Ji Tianxing. Audacious thief, hand over your life. Ji Tianxing, I want your dog life. Since you're courting death, we'll fulfill your wish. In a split second, the overwhelming radiance of blades and swords, as well as the colorful brilliance of spells, drowned Ji Tianxing's figure like a monstrous flood. Paragon sword body. Ji Tianxing was fearless. His entire body lit up with black light, and his body turned into a huge black vortex. Swish, swish. The saber lights and sword shadows that filled the sky fell into the vortex and were immediately swallowed up. In the next moment, the attacks of the 3 martial saints disappeared into thin air, and Ji Tianxing appeared unscathed. Not only did the 3 of them fail to injure him, they were even refined into magic power for his own use. 7-star sword. Ji Tianxing angrily roared again, waving the burial of heaven sword and thrusting out 49 sword beams, enveloping Qing Shan, Chen Yu, and Chao Ying. The 3 of them were shocked. They hurriedly brandished their swords and sabers, casting spells with all their might to resist. But it was futile. Peng, peng, peng. A series of muffled sounds rang out, and the 3 of them were sent flying by the starry sword light. The 3 of them had suffered heavy injuries. There were at least 4 or 5 wounds on their bodies, all of which were so deep that their bones could be seen. The most miserable one was Martial Saint Qing Shan. His entire left leg was chopped off, and he let out a heart-wrenching scream. After repelling the 3 with a single sword strike, Ji Tianxing charged at Yuan Zhen with his sword in hand. Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and Helian Wuzhua could not just stand by and watch. They had no choice but to step forward. The 3 of them each performed their own unique skills, controlling 2 swords, 1 cauldron, and 2 millstone axes, charging towards Ji Tianxing with an imposing aura. However, a cold starlight flew over from the side, blooming into thousands of starlight sword flowers. Your opponent is me. As the silver sword flowers bloomed, Yoon Yaro's clear and cold voice rang out, echoing in the sky. Peng! 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 Another series of muffled sounds rang out, reverberating in the valley. The violent force exploded, dispersing the clouds and mist within a radius of 100 miles. Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and Helian Wuzhua had not recovered from their injuries, so they were still weak. After exchanging a blow, they were actually pushed back 1,000 feet by Yoon Yao. Their aura was also stagnant. Before they could regain their composure, Yoon Yao waved her silver moon dual swords and launched an attack at them. Therefore, the three of them could only focus on dealing with Yoon Yao's fierce attacks with all their might. Ji Tianxing took this opportunity to attack Yuan Zhen. Heaven-splitting sword. Ji Tianxing held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and slashed out 1,000 feet long starry sword, descending from the sky. Before the giant sword arrived, the terrifying sword intent had already locked onto Yuan Zhen's divine soul, filling him with terror and fear. He knew that he could not block the giant sword's attack, so he hurriedly retreated while wielding his sword to block. Not far away, Qing Shan, Chao Ying, and Chen Yu rushed over, but they were too late to help. Kaboom! Amidst the thunder-like explosion, Yuan Zhen's sword light was shattered, and the 1,000-feet-long giant sword landed on him. Suddenly, the golden robe and soft armor he wore shattered into countless pieces and scattered in the sky. He was also sent flying, and a 2-foot-long wound appeared on his chest, spurting out a large amount of blood. If it were not for his dharmic power shield and soft armor that blocked part of the power, he would have been cut in half by the giant sword. After flying 15 miles, he barely managed to stop. His face was full of pain, and fear flashed in his eyes. He could not care less about roaring and cursing, and hurriedly channeled his energy to suppress his injuries. However, Ji Tianxing did not spare him. He was determined to kill him, so he attacked again with his sword. Yuan Zhen, you can go die now. Ji Tianxing roared. He raised the burial of heaven again and slashed down. Another giant sword, which was thousands of feet long, formed by 5-colored lightning, drowned Yuan Zhen's figure with endless divine power. Yuan Zhen was heavily injured, and he was suppressed by the giant sword's power. He could not dodge at all. He was about to be killed by the giant sword. At this critical moment, a light yellow figure flew in from the side and blocked in front of him without any regard for its own safety. Bang! A deafening muffled sound burst out, echoing endlessly in the canyon. The slightly thin and weak light yellow figure was split in half by the giant sword on the spot, and blood splattered all over the sky. Yuan Zhen was also pushed back by the violent impact, and he rolled and crashed into a cliff 10 miles away. Even though his injuries were worse, and he was in so much pain that his body twitched, he forgot about the pain. However, he had completely forgotten about his pain. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at the 2 halves of the corpse falling from the sky. When he saw the corpse's appearance, his body stiffened, and his expression became extremely ugly. It was Marshal Saint Chao Ying. It was that quiet, elegant, and dignified woman. Yuan Zhen knew that Chao Ying had feelings for him for a long time. However, he did not take Chao Ying seriously, and had never responded to her advances. He was the great divine son of the Heaven's End Holy Nation, and the future ruler of the Holy Nation. How noble was his status! Chao Ying was only a descendant of a hidden sect, and her beauty was only above average. She was not a beauty, nor was she a noble figure from a prestigious family. How could she be worthy of him? However, Yuan Zhen did not expect that the person who saved him when his life was hanging by a thread would be Chao Ying. It was not Marshal Saint Qingshan, who was most loyal to him, or Marshal Saint Chen Yu, who respected him greatly. It was the most silent and ordinary Chao Ying. At that moment, Yuan Zhen realized his mistake, and his heart was filled with deep regret. However, it was too late. Chao Ying's corpse fell quickly into the valley, and was buried by the ruins. Her white spiritual soul was severely injured, and it was unconscious, floating in the air like a cloud. Yuan Zhen woke up immediately, and rushed to the spiritual soul crazily, muttering, "No, Chao Ying is not dead. Her spiritual soul is still here. I can't let her die, I can't." At that moment, he used all his strength to rush over, and held Chao Ying's spiritual soul in his hands. Then, he turned around and ran away without hesitation. Chapter 23-21. Marshal Saint Qingshan and Marshal Saint Chenyu were filled with fear after witnessing Chao Ying's body being destroyed. When they saw Yuanzhan running away, they followed him subconsciously. However, what Yuanzhan said before leaving instantly caused their bodies to stiffen, and their expressions became extremely unsightly. Their thoughts of running away were extinguished on the spot, and their hearts were filled with despair. Yuanzhan's words were not a request, but an order. If they dared to disobey, with Yuanzhan's nature, he might really kill them. However, they were both subjects of the Heaven-End divine nation, and they could not go against Yuanzhan. After hesitating for a moment, they could only accept their fate. Even if they braced themselves and were prepared to die, the two of them could only face Ji Tianqing head-on and unleash their strongest attacks. One sword breaks Qingshan. Flying flowers fill the sky. Marshal Saint Qingshan waved his sword and slashed out a giant green sword that could split heaven and earth, charging toward Ji Tianqing. Marshal Saint Chenyu's sleeves fluttered, and pink flowers covered the sky. They surrounded Ji Tianqing like a rain of flowers and exploded. They knew Ji Tianqing's strength very well, and they did not dare to hope that these two secret techniques could injure or kill Ji Tianqing. They only hoped to delay him for a moment. As long as they could cover Yuanzhan's retreat, their mission would be completed. Bang! 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 Ji Tianqing waved his sword and slashed out hundreds of sword lights, shattering the rain of flowers. He then raised his left hand and threw out a star-shattering fist, shattering the giant green sword. In the blink of an eye, Marshal Saint Qingshan and Marshal Saint Chenyu's attacks were easily neutralized. Then, he waved the Burial of Heaven sword and slashed out a giant sword made of 5-colored divine lightning. Kaboom! With a thunderous explosion, the giant sword of lightning hit Marshal Saint Qingshan. Marshal Saint Qingshan was instantly wrapped by the 5-colored divine lightning, and his entire body was charred black. Black smoke rose in spirals, making him look like a piece of charcoal. The incomparably violent impact caused his entire body to split open and spurt out pitch-black, filthy blood. His entire body flew backward, drawing an arc in the sky before crashing into the ruins 30 miles away. Marshal Saint Chenyu saw Marshal Saint Qingshan being severely injured with her own eyes. She was so shocked that she forgot about Yuanzhan's order. Without hesitation, she turned around and flew towards the northwest. However, Ji Tianqing did not let her go. He waved his left hand and shot out a dazzling golden light. Heaven-capturing dragon claw. The golden light that covered the sky condensed into a giant dragon claw that was the size of a mountain. It descended from the sky and enveloped Marshal Saint Chenyu. Marshal Saint Chenyu was horrified. She tried her best to teleport away, trying to escape the dragon claw's attack. However, the space within a radius of dozens of miles had been sealed. She couldn't teleport at all. Boom! Amidst the deafening muffled sound, Marshal Saint Chenyu was ruthlessly slammed by the heaven-capturing dragon claw. She spat out a mouthful of blood as she crashed into the ruins, causing dust to fill the air. Her body was covered with cracks and wounds, like a broken porcelain bowl. Dark red blood gushed out from dozens of wounds, drenching her entire body. Endless dust enveloped her, making her look extremely miserable. In just a few breaths' time, Qingshan and Chen Yu were defeated and heavily injured. Both of them were powerless to stop Ji Tianqing. They could only endure their injuries and crawl out of the ruins, fleeing towards the two sides of the canyon. Ji Tianqing wanted to chase after Yuanzhan. However, he had already wasted 10 breaths' time in order to deal with Qingshan and Chen Yu. Now, when he went to chase after Yuanzhan again, he couldn't even see his shadow. Helplessly, he could only give up on chasing after Yuanzhan and vent all his anger on Qingshan and Chen Yu. Seeing Marshal Saint Qingshan fly across the sky, wanting to take the opportunity to escape, he stabbed out a few starry sword lights without hesitation. 7-star sword. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. 7 starry sword lights streaked across the sky and instantly pierced the charred Marshal Saint Qingshan. At the moment of life and death, a determined look flashed across Marshal Saint Qingshan's eyes. He immediately made up his mind and took out a huge dark golden battle flag, blocking in front of him like a wall. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The incomparably sharp starlight sword light pierced the golden battle flag one after another, cutting the huge battle flag into a dozen pieces. This battle flag was Marshal Saint Qingshan's trump card, a high-grade sacred artifact with special effects. He rarely used it. Now that it was a matter of life and death, he could only reluctantly take it out. The result was just as he expected. The battle flag blocked the sword lights but was torn into pieces. Fortunately, Marshal Saint Qingshan dodged the calamity. His strong desire to survive caused him to erupt with unlimited potential, and his fleeing speed increased by 2 times. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, he traversed hundreds of miles of sky and disappeared into the depths of the clouds. Ji Tianxing didn't chase after him. Instead, he turned and attacked Marshal Saint Chen Yu. Marshal Saint Chen Yu's injuries were very serious. After barely escaping 400 miles, Ji Tianxing caught up with him. Piercing sword. Ji Tianxing held the Heavenpiercer sword and pierced through the air, aiming directly at Marshal Saint Chen Yu's back. Marshal Saint Chen Yu's divine soul was instantly locked by the terrifying sword will. Her body also became stiff. Her eyes were filled with despair. She had a premonition that death was coming. However, she wasn't as lucky as Marshal Saint Qingshan. She also didn't have a powerful trump card. Her ending was already decided. Bam! With a muffled sound, a cold light pierced through Marshal Saint Chen Yu's back and exploded in her chest. A huge silver mushroom cloud rose into the sky, illuminating the canyon for hundreds of miles. Marshal Sacred Chen Yu's body was shattered into pieces on the spot, which fell from the sky into thousands of pieces. Even her divine soul had been blown into dozens of pieces, floating in the air like white spots of light. Marshal Saint Chen Yu, who had charmed countless nobles and experts and had countless men under her skirt, died just like that. Ji Tianxing didn't even bother to look at her. He turned and attacked Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and the others. The 3 descendants of the aristocratic families were attacking Yun Yao. They were actually in a stalemate and wouldn't end in a short time. Of course, Yun Yao had the upper hand. She wasn't injured at all. On the other hand, Jiang Qi, Tuoba Da, and Helian Wuju's injuries became more serious and their powers became weaker. Ji Tianxing rushed to the battlefield and glanced at the sky 100 miles away. He saw Tantai Xian'er standing on top of a huge rock on the cliff and watching the fight from afar. She acted as if this matter had nothing to do with her and was just watching the fire burn across the river. She had no intention of interfering. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing's sharp eyes became gentler. If Tantai Xian'er dared to attack Yun Yao, he would never let her go. Heaven-breaking sword. While Jiang Qi and the other 2 were fighting with Yun Yao, Ji Tianxing suddenly teleported behind Tuoba Da and slashed with his sword. The huge golden sword that was 100 feet long descended on Tuoba Da's head with the power to destroy everything. Tuoba Da was taken aback. His eyes were filled with fear. Chapter 23-22. Bam! Amidst the deafening noise, the huge golden sword struck Tuoba Da's double axes. The 2 axes were sent flying, and the giant sword was also shattered. Tuoba Da was sent flying, and his back collided with Yun Yao's dozens of sword auras. Swoosh! Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, dozens of bloody holes appeared on his back, and blood splattered everywhere. The sudden pain made him roar into the sky, and he let out a blood-curdling scream. Before he could stabilize his body, Ji Tianxing slapped another huge golden palm at him. Bam! Tuoba Da was hit by the golden palm, and he was sent flying dozens of miles away. He crashed into the cliff at the edge of the valley, and rocks were sent flying everywhere. Jiang Qi and Helian Wuju saw that Ji Tianxing had joined the battle and severely injured Tuoba Da in one move, and they wanted to retreat. Both of them made a feint, and after forcing Yun Yao to retreat, they ran as fast as they could. Ji Tianxing quickly chased after them, and punched at Helian Wuju, and slashed at Jiang Qi with his sword. Both of them had no choice but to cast spells to block. Bam! Bam! With a dull thud, both of them were sent flying, and they spat out blood as they crashed into the ruins. Before they could recover, Yun Yao attacked again with her sword, and hundreds of sword auras were sent flying. Swish! 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 Jiang Qi and Helian Wuju were infuriated. They could only endure their injuries and take out their Dharma treasures to block. The purple and green dual swords and an octagonal golden cauldron flew out, shining brightly, and blocked in front of them. The sword auras pierced the dual swords and the golden cauldron, and a series of crisp sounds were heard. Cling, clang, clang. After an intense collision, the purple and green dual swords and the golden cauldron dimmed, and they fell in front of the two weakly. At this moment, Ji Tianxing attacked again, and sent out dozens of golden sword auras. Even though Jiang Qi and Helian Wuzhua tried their best to block, they were still stabbed a few times, and a few bloody holes appeared on their bodies, and blood splattered everywhere. The two of them knew that they couldn't stay here any longer. Otherwise, they would have to endure the continuous attacks of Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao. They would be killed within a few moves. As a result, the two of them made up their minds and used all their strength to activate the azurette swords and octagonal golden cauldron to attack Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao. While the couple was casting spells to defend themselves, the two of them turned around and fled without hesitation. 2 breaths later, Ji Tianxing broke the twin swords while Yun Yao shattered the octagonal golden cauldron. The broken sword and the fragments of the golden furnace fell from the sky and smashed into the canyon. However, Jiang Qi and Helian Wuzhua had already escaped far away. Even if Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao chased after them, it would be very difficult for them to catch up in a short period of time. The couple then looked at the ruins 100 miles away. They wanted to kill the heavily injured Tuoba Da unexpectedly. Tuoba Da had already fled under the cover of Tantai's Yan and vanished without a trace. As a result, of the 7 martial saints that Yuanzhen brought, other than Chen, the martial saint was killed on the spot, Chao Ying's physical body was destroyed, and the other 5 escaped. Ji Tianxing furrowed his brows and said angrily, "Damn it. I wanted to kill them all, but I didn't expect them to escape." Yun Yao put away the twin swords and comforted him with a calm expression. "If you insist on chasing after any martial saints, you can definitely catch up and kill them. However, if you do that, not only will you waste time, you will also put yourself in danger. When we were fighting just now, the dozens of martial saints around us were a little restless. Fortunately, we defeated Yuan Zhan and the rest easily, so those people were intimidated. Look, those dozen or so groups of martial artists are very fearful and have all retreated to a further place." Ji Tianxing looked around for a moment and found that those martial saints had indeed retreated and stopped looking at them. Yun Yao continued, "You don't have to worry. This result is quite good. Yuanzhen's people are either dead or injured, and they have all fled. They won't be able to come back in a short time. When they recover from their injuries and come back for revenge, we will have broken the seal and entered the secret realm. When we get martial god Nangong's treasures and divine weapons, killing them will be as easy as flipping our hands." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "Yes, it seems like this is the only way now. Yuan Zhen's people have all fled, and the surrounding martial saints are also intimidated. They won't dare to attack us again. Now that the situation is settled, I can break the seal with peace of mind." Then, he turned and flew back into the cave. He took out some medicinal pills and consumed them to recover his magic power. Yun Yao landed beside him and also consumed some medicinal pills to recover her magic power. 6 hours later, the two of them had refined the medicinal power, and their magic power and mental state had both recovered. Then, the two of them began to work together to break the seal. Although the divine-level seal was strong, Ji Tianxing was familiar with thousands of divine-level formations and had already deduced the way to break it. Yun Yao helped him wholeheartedly. She started to cast spells according to his instructions, and shot out streaks of dazzling light. The two of them were so focused on casting spells to break the seal that they completely forgot about the passage of time. Unknowingly, 2 days had passed. Although the two of them had been breaking the seal, the martial saints in the valley were too intimidated and didn't dare to have any evil thoughts. Even an expert like Yuan Zhan, who had led 7 martial saints to besiege Ji Tianxing and his wife, had still ended up with heavy casualties. Among the martial saints in the valley, who dared to come to their deaths? Soon, another day had passed. For 3 whole days, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao had been focused on breaking the seal and hadn't rested at all. The two of them had consumed a lot of their spiritual energy and magic power. Their faces were pale, and beads of sweat appeared on their foreheads. However, the 5-colored light curtain had become thinner, and its light was also gradually dimming. Success was right in front of them. No matter how tired they were, they would grit their teeth and persevere. Finally, on the evening of the 4th day, the 5-colored light curtain that sealed the cave completely disappeared. Whoosh! The 5-colored light quickly shrunk until it completely disappeared, and the cave was instantly plunged into darkness. Ji Tianxing had successfully broken the illusory Void Secret Realm's deity seal. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yarrow slowly stopped and looked at each other with gratified smiles. Phew! I underestimated this sealing formation. Even after 4,000 years, it still retains 70% of its power. It's really not simple. President Ji Tian heaved a sigh of relief and lamented. Yun Yarrow raised her hand to wipe away the sweat on her forehead and said expectantly, "In the current Shunwu continent, besides the 3 martial gods, you are the only one who can successfully break a deity seal. If we can obtain a powerful deity weapon, we will be qualified to compete with the martial gods." Ji Tianxing nodded and smiled. "I wonder what martial god Nangong's cave looks like. What treasures are hidden inside? Let's go in and take a look." As he spoke, he took out the sword of burial of heaven and led the way into the depths of the cave. Yun Yarrow held her silver moon swords and followed closely behind him. She was always on guard against their surroundings. Although martial god Nangong's cave might contain deity weapons and treasures, it was still very likely that the cave would contain deity weapons and treasures. Chapter 23:23. At first, Ji Tianxing thought that martial god Nangong's cave abode was a ruin buried deep underground. But later, he realized that wasn't the case. At the end of the cold and dark cave was a starlight disk with a radius of 10 feet. It was a teleportation array that led to an unknown place. There were hundreds of intersecting golden light lines in the disk, which divided it into 365 cells. Every grid was of the same size, and all of them were surging with white starlight, constantly flickering. Ji Tianxing knew that the disk was the heavenly cycle stellar disk, which corresponded to the stars in the sky and contained the secrets of the heavenly cycle stellar disk. If one wasn't a martial god, they wouldn't be able to study it thoroughly, let alone set it up and use it. Even a martial god would have to spend hundreds or thousands of years to understand the secrets of the heavenly cycle stellar array and open or close it. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing was knowledgeable and his memory was as vast as the sea. He had also mastered the secrets of the heavenly cycle stellar array to an extremely high level. After all, the heavenly cycle stellar array was the foundation of many divine arrays. Yarrow, wait here for a while. I'll be able to crack this teleportation array soon. He warned Yun Yarrow, and then began to cast a spell to break open the formation. Yun Yarrow took a few steps back and guarded Ji Tianxing with the silver moon swords while secretly recovering her Dharma power. Swish, swish, swish. Ji Tianxing put away the sword of burial of heaven and formed a sword art with both hands. He kept shooting out silver sword auras into the heavenly cycle stellar array. Suddenly, the starlight disk started to move. The 360 cells flashed with starlight and kept changing their positions. This divine formation contained boundless profundities. It contained over 99,000 transformations, and it was extremely complicated and profound. But Ji Tianxing knew this array like the back of his hand. He didn't slow down at all. As his casting speed increased, the starlight disk spun faster and faster. Gradually, it became dazzling and colorful. The surging divine power gushed out like a tide and poured into the canyon through the cave. For a time, the canyon within a radius of a few hundred kilometers was filled with dense silver dots of light. It was a dreamy and blurry scene. The dozen or so groups of martial practitioners hiding in the canyon all discovered the anomaly. Everyone immediately became lively and their curiosity was piqued. Many martial sages tried to release their divine senses into the cave to see what was going on. Waves of whispers and discussions also sounded in the crowd. Strange, why is there so much starlight gushing out from that cave? Such pure and mighty energy is definitely not something that a martial saint can control. Could this be divine energy? There's no martial god realm expert here. Only the God-level formation of the illusionary mystical ground is capable of unleashing the God force. Ji Tianxing seems to have broken the seal of the illusory void secret realm. Unbelievable. He is only a martial sage, but he is able to break the deity grade seal. I am very sure that he is the reincarnation of Kenshin. Otherwise, he would not be so powerful. It seems like he has not entered the illusionary void secret realm. There seems to be an array in the cave. I really want to enter the cave to see what is going on. However, Ji Tianxing is too cruel and merciless. He will kill us if he doesn't agree with us. Let alone entering the cave, we don't even dare to use our divine senses to check on him. If we anger him, we will definitely die. Many martial sages were hesitant and conflicted. Everyone wanted to see what was going on, but no one dared to take a step forward. Unknowingly, 10 hours had passed. Ji Tianxing continued to cast his skills and shot out tens of thousands of starlight sword radiances. He had successfully opened the ancient sky star array. Swoosh! The starlight disk stopped moving, and the starlight in the 365 grids gathered together, forming a silvery white light gate that was more than 10 feet tall. The mysterious silver light door stood quietly in the cave and no one knew where it led to. Ji Tianxing looked a little tired, but he was very excited. His eyes were filled with anticipation. We will enter the illusionary void secret realm after we cross this teleportation formation. Yao Yao, let's go. After saying that, he stepped into the teleportation formation. Yun Yao followed closely behind. She stepped into the teleportation formation and disappeared with a swoosh. After the two of them left, the cave became silent. However, the white light door still stood in the darkness and exuded a majestic and sacred aura. Half an hour later, more than 10 groups of martial artists hiding in the valley could not hold back their curiosity when they saw that there was no movement in the cave. A red-haired martial sage mustered up his courage and released his divine senses into the cave. Soon, he saw that there was no one in the cave except for a tall white light door. Ji Tianxing is gone. He must have entered the illusionary void secret realm. That teleportation formation is the real entrant. The red-haired martial sage was shocked and shouted in surprise. His companion was also overjoyed and said excitedly, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go in. Even if Ji Tianxing is going to eat the meat, we can still drink the soup." The two of them immediately reached a consensus. They flew across the sky at lightning speed and entered the cave. When the other groups of martial artists saw that the two martial sages had entered the cave without fear of death, they could not hold back their curiosity. Many of them released their divine senses to check the situation in the cave. When they realized that Ji Tianxing had disappeared and that there was a teleportation formation in the cave, they instantly became excited. Ji Tianxing and his wife have already opened the illusionary void secret realm. They have already entered the secret realm. How can we be left behind? Ha ha ha. We have waited for so long. Finally, we see hope. Ji Tianxing will clear the obstacles in front and we will follow behind to pick up the leftovers. This is perfect. More than 10 groups of martial artists were overjoyed and dashed into the cave without caring about their own safety. In less than 15 minutes, 18 groups of people, more than 100 powerhouses, had rushed into the cave and entered the illusionary void secret realm. The valley, which had been filled with an oppressive atmosphere and danger, immediately became quiet. At this moment, 2 figures flew down from the mountain peak and landed at the entrance of the cave. They were 2 middle-aged men and they were both top martial sages. The man on the left was wearing a purple robe. He had a handsome face and long white hair. There was a purple sword-shaped mark on his forehead. The man on the right was wearing a black robe and a large cloak that covered his entire face. His appearance could not be seen clearly. The two of them stood side by side and looked coldly at the entrance of the cave. The man in the purple robe on the left said, "Alliance Leader Wu, you guessed right. He has really broken the seal of the secret realm." The man in the black robe, who was called Alliance Leader Wu, said indifferently, "Commander Yi, both of us know his true identity. Isn't it normal for him to be able to accomplish such a miracle?" Commander Yi nodded slightly and said in a cold voice, "We have been observing from afar for 5 days and have been waiting patiently for an opportunity. In these 5 days, He has been breaking the divine array and has not rested at all. Now, his powers must be depleted.